I invite the House to take note that today we are using the wooden mace.
This mace is a reminder of the fire that claimed 7 lives and destroyed the original Parliament buildings the night of February 3rd, 1916.
Destroyed in that fire was the old mace. The wooden copy that we see here today was subsequently made and used temporarily until the current one was given to us by the United Kingdom in 1917.
As the House will not be sitting Sunday, the anniversary of the fire, the wooden mace is being used today to recall what happened 103 years ago.
Orders of the day.
Government orders, government bills, commons. Consideration of a motion respecting Senate amendments in relation to Bill C-64, Wrecked, Abandoned, or Hazardous Vessels Act.
Ms. Chagger for Mr. Garneau, seconded by Monsieur Champagne, moves that the amendment made by the Senate to Bill C-64, an act respecting wrecks, abandoned, dilapidated, and hazardous vessels and salvage operations, be now read a second time and concurred in. Debate. The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm so pleased to be here today in our new House of Commons. Before, I used to sit to the left of the Speaker, but now I have the right to sit to the right because this is a much bigger space.
The wooden mace is here today because it does really bring things full circle in terms of the old and the new within this place. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to speak on the subject of Bill C-64, an act respecting wrecks, abandoned, dilapidated, or hazardous vessels, and salvage operations, legislation that will help protect and preserve Canada's marine ecosystem and make our waterways safer. A year ago, the proposed bill was carefully studied by the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. The committee heard from over 20 witnesses from the marine industry, Indigenous groups, civil society, as well as other orders of government. The government has the goal of working in partnership with these key stakeholders to support the implementation of measures contained within this Act. I'm delighted with the committee's work and collaboration in adopting 6 amendments, including an amendment put forward by a member of the opposition. Several important amendments were made to protect and preserve the rights of owners of found wrecks as well as the rights of salvors. For example, one of the elements of Bill C-64 will require that a public notice be posted for a minimum of 30 days to indicate that a wreck has been reported. The receiver of wreck will have to wait out the notification period before taking any action on a wreck. Should other efforts to identify or contact the owner fail, the public notice increases the chance of finding the rightful owner and ensures the owner has an opportunity to come forward and claim their wreck. I'm also grateful for the work undertaken by the Transport and Communications Committee in the other place. Before us today is the amendment proposed in the other place meant to ensure that heritage wreck regulation making powers extend to the wrecks of Canadian and foreign military vessels and aircraft, non-commercial governmental vessels, and mineral exploration vessels was an important addition and one which will add to the core reason for this bill's existence, namely to protect and preserve Canada's marine ecosystems and make our waterways safer. This bill also underwent meticulous study by way of debate in both chambers, and I would like to thank the members of each for their diligence and thoroughness. While the vast majority of vessel owners in Canada act responsibly and dispose of their vessels properly, some owners see abandonment as a low-cost, low-risk option for dilapidated vessels. And this creates a serious problem for our waterways, posing safety, environmental, economic, and social risks. Proper remediation of these vessels can be complex and costly. Up to now, the financial burden has often fallen to Canadian taxpayers. With this legislation, the federal government will have more authority to prevent the hazards caused by abandoned and wrecked vessels, rather than the job of dealing with the risks of that these vessels pose after an incident has already occurred. Bill C-64 addresses the issue of abandoned, wrecked, and hazardous vessels in a comprehensive way and seeks to fill the gaps in the existing federal legislative framework. The federal government has limited authority to address problem vessels for far too long, and until now, authorities were limited in addressing many of the harmful impacts of problem vessels, such as pollution discharge and obstruction to navigation. This legislation addresses the vessel itself and increases the government's ability to take proactive action. In short, this legislation actually has some teeth. The federal government will be able to direct owners to fix problems with their dilapidated or hazardous vessels, and if they don't, the federal government will do so, making owners liable for costs and expenses. The bill will prohibit not only abandonment, but also leaving a vessel adrift for more than 48 hours without working to secure it, or leaving vessels in very poor condition in the same area for more than 60 consecutive days without consent. Bill C-64 puts in place an enforcement framework establishing strong regulatory offenses and penalties to punish noncompliance. Enforcement of this new legislation will be shared between the Department of Transport and the Departments of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard. To support the effective implementation of this legislation, the Canadian Coast Guard is developing a national inventory and a risk assessment methodology to allow us to understand the extent of the issue nationally and to help prioritize our response to problem vessels based on the risks they pose. This builds on the strengths and the distinct roles, mandates, and capabilities already existing within each department. And Bill C-64 also consolidates existing provisions that deal with wrecks and salvage into a single act. By incorporating the existing Canada Shipping Act 2001 provisions that pertain to International Convention on Salvage in 1998, as well as the functional role of the receiver of wreck. Owners of vessels that are 300 gross tons or larger would also now be required to have wreck insurance or other financial banking to cover the costs related to their removal if they become a hazardous wreck. Bill C-64 is but one piece of a national strategy to address abandoned and wrecked vessels. Other measures of the strategy include 2 short-term funding programs that support communities in assessing and removing abandoned or wrecked vessels, the establishment of long-term owner finance funds to address problem vessels, the enhancement of owner identification, as well as initiatives to increase awareness of the new legislation and of vessel recycling and design. By ensuring that vessel owners are held liable for locating, marking, and if necessary, removing any wreck that poses a hazard resulting from a marine casualty, Canada would meet its obligations under the Nairobi International Convention on the Removal of Wrecks 2007 once it becomes a party to that convention. And Mr. Speaker, when a car reaches the end of its useful life, we don't accept owners leaving it by the side of the road for someone else to deal with. So it should be with acceptable vessels on water. Let me conclude by reiterating that the broader strategy aims to ensure that all causes, pathways, and irresponsible vessel management are addressed. Our coasts and waterways are symbolic of Canadian life and culture, and it's certainly no more true than in my province of Newfoundland. The measure contained within the Wrecked, Abandoned, or Hazardous Vessels Act will help prevent and reduce the number of abandoned, dilapidated, and wrecked vessels in Canadian waters for the benefit of future generations. Our waterways should not and cannot be treated as junkyards for vessels that have reached their end of life or have been abandoned by irresponsible owners. Our coasts and waterways are common heritage of all Canadians, and they are crucially important to our environment, our communities, our economy, and our way of life. And so I encourage all members to support Bill C-64, which will go a long way in protecting these resources. Now, with respect to my own riding of St. John's East, I do have a number of small craft harbors. There's a number of former ports within my riding. Certainly, this issue of abandoned vessels has been a problem. I receive complaints almost every winter about people leaving their vessels unattended in the small craft harbor at Tappers Cove in Tor Bay. As well, our government has been instrumental in helping the small craft harbor in Balleen remove a number of dilapidated and abandoned vessels that accumulated on their slipway. And this is extremely dangerous to the infrastructure. It's dangerous to people who also use the slipways and the small craft harbor port facilities for their own recreational or commercial use. It's expensive to the small craft arbors, which are often staffed in my end of the world by volunteers and people who give of their time to make their communities safer and more economically vibrant, and don't necessarily have the wherewithal or the financial means to address the port's problems regarding wrecked or abandoned vessels themselves. And so we're very encouraged with what's already been done. I know the small craft harbor port authorities in my riding are very happy with us taking this step, this additional step. I would like to also thank and congratulate one of my colleagues from Nova Scotia, now the Minister for Rural Economic Development, who has really been a champion on this issue, pushing to make sure that the issue of abandoned vessels is addressed not only in her neck of the woods in rural Nova Scotia, but throughout the waterways of our country, because it's become a real and substantial problem. In addition to the two ports that I've mentioned, there are also issues in Flat Rock, in Pooch Cove, in Portugal Cove, St. Phillips, and when it was within the framework of the federal review and federal authority, the Small Craft Harbor in Kitty Vitty. This legislation will actually even help in situations like the port in Kitty Vitty, the small craft harbor there. Even though it's not a federally designated port, the vessels that are moored there, tied there, used there, are still going to be governed by this legislation. So there'll be an opportunity for the non-federally funded small craft harbors to help us in making sure that those ports aren't burdened by derelict and abandoned vessels. And so again, I just would like to encourage all members of this House to now support the twice amended bill and to see it enacted so that our waterways can be safer in the 2019 shipping, fishing, and recreational use season. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first want to thank my colleague from Newfoundland for his speech and for shared values on coastal communities and the importance of dealing with derelict vessels. I do have some concerns, though, Mr. Speaker. The former member of this House from Nanaimo, Ladysmith, Sheila Malcolmson, who's the new MLA of Nanaimo, she raised several issues that she brought to Transport Committee. She brought 13 recommendations. These were developed by coastal communities with Island Trust, with local governments, with First Nations, all brought forward based on models that are working in other jurisdictions around the world, like in Washington State. And this government turned down 12 of 13 recommendations. These recommendations were all embedded in her bill, C-352, which this government refused to allow a vote on. And it's kind of ironic, Mr. Speaker, because this bill was replicated on Jean Crowder, the former member from Cowichan, Nanaimo, her bill, which the Prime Minister supported when he was in opposition, and the Minister of Transportation, the President of the Treasury Board, all voted in support of Jean Crowder's bill, yet they turn around and they deny all of the recommendations, almost 12 of 13, from the member from Nanaimo, Ladysmith, with no explanation, Mr. Speaker. And they fast-track a bill that has huge holes in it and could fix a lot of problems in coastal communities. So maybe the member can explain why some of his cabinet voted for a bill in 2015 and then turn around now in this government, in this session of Parliament, and deny the same amendments that were brought forward in that bill, denied the right of a member of Parliament to advance very important comprehensive solutions that were developed by coastal communities like his. And someone from coastal community, you'd think that he would want to make sure that coastal community voices were embedded in this bill and they weren't missed. Thank you.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Courtenay Alberni for bringing the concerns of his party and his region, and also those of Ms. Malcolmson. I'd certainly like to thank Ms. Malcolmson for all the wonderful work she did here, including at Transport Committee. Very thorough work, and she proposed a number of amendments. I know that one of them was accepted, 12 were not. And I'm sure now that she's a member of the government party in British Columbia, she'll see that there's difficulties associated with governing and that it's much easier to propose things and claim that they're going to necessarily be workable. And then once you're on the government side, you have to make sure that you take the interests of all stakeholders and not just yours into account. And so in this particular instance, we see that the government has listened. Amendments from the Senate have been accepted. Amendments from parties at the Transportation Committee were accepted, including, as the member has pointed out, one from Ms. Malcolmson. The bill is sound. It addresses the problems in a structured way that aligns with the strategy that's been proposed. And I highlighted a number of other strategic measures that have been taken in connection with abandoned and dilapidated vessels that we believe address the points in a comprehensive way. But that's not to say that better isn't always possible. And so I do thank the member for his comments. They're interesting, they're thought-provoking, but I think at this point the government has done an excellent job in finding the right balance between the interests of all stakeholders in a workable fashion. And if Ms. Malcolmson is interested in doing something in British Columbia, she now has the opportunity with the government there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Burnaby North Seymour.
I first came across this issue in my previous role as the Parliamentary Secretary for Fisheries and Oceans, and I had an opportunity to meet with all members of the Capital Regional District on Vancouver Island. This represented mayors and councillors from all around the region, and they had the opportunity to ask questions or talk about concerns on any issue they wanted, and every single person took their turn talking about this issue. So I'm excited that this bill is finally coming through the House and heading back, hopefully, to the Senate. I had a town hall in my own riding in Deep Cove, and I thought maybe a few dozen people would show up, and we completely filled the library in Sea Cove Elementary. Now, one of the biggest differences between things that have been debated here in the House today, particularly the NDP position versus the position that the government has taken, is that the NDP want taxpayers to pay for these cleanups, whereas our provisions focus on the polluter paying under these individual provisions. In fact, we've strengthened polluter pay in a lot of our provisions and a lot of our legislation, and I would like to understand and hear what the member has to say about those specific measures.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you. I'd very much like to thank the member for Burnaby North Simcoe and the Parliamentary Secretary for Transport for his comments. I also had a roundtable in my riding regarding the small craft harbors. We had about 140 people there who brought, as I previously said, people are happy that we're taking this issue head on. We're providing means and teeth and authority, but we're also respecting the interests of vessel owners to receive adequate notice so that they can protect their interests. And in general, it's our sense that this legislation is very well received, notwithstanding some of the comments that may have been made on the other side that other things should have been in the legislation. We believe that also here on the other side of the country, in Newfoundland and Labrador, that the legislation meets the needs of Canadians and coastal communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I'm very pleased to see Bill C-64 back before the House. I would only have wished the government saw a way to accept all the Senate amendments only for the reasons that we want to make sure this bill comes into force as soon as possible. Residents throughout the Southern Gulf Islands, we've had town hall meetings, we had a community meeting just last week, and representatives from Transport Canada were there. They said they have the budget, they're raring to go. We have derelict vessels that need cleaning up. We need a lot more money. I would have also rather seen some improvements in this bill, but I want it brought into force as soon as possible. It should have been before Christmas, but we are where we are now. And my only question will be whether we can make sure that in the regulation phase, we seek to ensure that every single vessel carry insurance. That's one way to make sure that we know which vessels in our waters and that there's money to clean them up.
Member for St. John's East.
I'd like to thank the member for Saanich Gulf Island. She always approaches these, and the leader of the Green Party, for these, her very thoughtful consideration on this topic. As we've heard now from two opposition parties, they're keen in seeing more in the bill rather than what we have, but they also want to see that it gets through the House, that it's enacted and implemented, and there are provisions in the bill, perhaps not as strong as the member for Saanich Gulf Islands would like to see, regarding insurance. I know in the mining industry, the requirement that people have bonds for future environmental impact of their work is an extremely important aspect of any approval for the development of those mines, but we still have historical mining operations throughout the country, including in Newfoundland and Labrador, certainly in Labrador, where the issues around proper financial protections and bonds associated with future cleanup aren't as strong as they could be. This gets us into a good place, I believe, with respect to abandoned vessels. Could it be stronger? Certainly the enforcement mechanisms and the financing available to small craft harbors and other ports for the removal of vessels probably could always be a little bit more, but this is something that goes really into budget considerations and budget asks at budget time. I know that we were successful in a previous budget in getting an extra $250 million to small craft harbors. It wasn't aid-based funding that I'm sure that would have been the preference of the member from Saanich Gulf Islands, but it was funding that allowed for cleanup of these ports, making them more safe, improving the infrastructure, and in certain cases, removal of vessels. We would obviously like to see more of that ourselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader. About 45 seconds for a question and 45 for an answer, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, I do recognize the value of the legislation, and we talk about our oceans, shores, both the Atlantic, Pacific, and the Arctic. One of the things that in Manitoba with Lake Winnipeg and so forth, there are a great deal of abandonment issues within different provinces, and I know firsthand, even from a small lake of Pelican Lake in southern Manitoba, where we've seen small boats, but the point is, and I like the analogy when the member made reference, after you're done with your car, you just don't leave it on the highway. And so not only are we talking about oceans, but it's also important that we recognize that there is responsibility for boat owners or craft owners in the smaller lakes and rivers and so forth in our communities. And if you want to provide a quick comment.
Honourable member for St. John's East in 50 seconds or less, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And of course, when we talk about coast to coast to coast in Newfoundland, sometimes we think that that's just the 3 coasts on the island. There's another coast for Labrador. We have coast all the way along our navigable waters in the St. Lawrence. We have coasts in Winnipeg, on the west coast, in the Arctic. This legislation makes sure that there's a mechanism to make sure all the navigable waters are protected against abandoned and derelict vessels. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat, the honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am very thankful for the opportunity to speak to the government's response to the Senate amendments to Bill C-64, an act respecting wrecks, abandoned, dilapidated, or hazardous vessels and salvage operations. In short, I am very pleased that the government has agreed to accept these amendments and incorporate them into this bill. The issue of ocean war graves is one that needs to be addressed. I'll be discussing the amendments in more detail in a few minutes, but I would like to review how we've come to this place. Bill C-64 is a very important piece of legislation. Being from Saskatchewan, I have to acknowledge that the issue of wrecked and abandoned vessels is not one that I'm overly familiar with. I meet with constituents all the time, respond to their letters and emails, as well as host town halls throughout my riding of Yorkton Melville, and I think I can honestly say that not once has this issue ever been raised with one of my constituents. However, the issue of wrecked and abandoned vessels is an extremely important issue for many members of Parliament and their constituents who represent and live in coastal ridings, and it is important to all of Canada because of the lakes, as the member mentioned, across our country, our rivers, and the incredible privilege we all have of enjoying our coastlines. However, the issue of wrecked and abandoned vessels is an important issue, and Bill C-64 was considered so important that it was expedited through second reading so that the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities could immediately study it. As a country, we need to protect our coasts from the harmful impact of wrecked or abandoned vessels, both large and small, as well as protect the Canadian taxpayer from the negative impact and cost of wrecked, abandoned, and derelict vessels. With that said, at this time, I would like to discuss the amendments that the Senate has made to C-64, which are the substance of the motion that we're actually debating today. During its study, the members of the Transport, Infrastructure and Communities Committee heard from 2 witnesses who raised the issue of ocean war graves and Canada's lack of protection for them. Ocean war graves are the final resting place of Canadian sailors and merchant mariners who were lost at sea. It was extremely disturbing to me to learn that the final resting place of soldiers and mariners do not have the same protection as land-based military graves. In fact, at present, it is not illegal for divers to enter these sunken vessels and remove artifacts, including human remains. I believe this is a legislative and regulatory gap that Parliament and the government definitely need to fill. The 2 witnesses I referenced above were Patrick White, the Executive Director of Project Naval Distinction, and retired Merchant Navy Captain and Second World War veteran Paul Bender. These witnesses estimate that the remains of approximately 1,200 Canadian sailors and merchant mariners are lying at rest in 9 wrecks in Canadian, international, and foreign waters. and that none of them have been afforded the necessary protection to discourage salvaging and desecration. Captain Bender and Mr. White made some specific recommendations at committee. As referenced on its website, Project Naval Distinction calls on Parliament and the Government of Canada to, and I quote, issue a policy statement affirming the Government of Canada's intention to provide legal protection for Canada's ocean war graves and make a formal request to the Government of the United Kingdom to protect Canadian ocean war graves in the UK waters. Secondly, use any available legislation and executive powers to provide immediate protection for Canada's ocean war graves as an intermediate measure until stand-alone legislation can be enacted. And finally, enact stand-alone legislation to provide legal protection for Canada's ocean war graves, ensuring the punishment for desecration is in line with the punishment for desecration of land-based war graves, end quote. I am really pleased to bring to the attention of Canadians, serving members of our armed forces, and our veteran community that the member for Carleton Trail, Eagle Creek, who serves them as official opposition's shadow minister for transport, sought amendments to C-64 at the House of Commons Tran Committee to protect war graves in line with witnesses' recommendations. After learning about the legislative gap on this issue, following its study of Bill C-64, the Tran Committee did undertake a short study specifically on the issue of ocean war graves. During the study, Mr. White and Captain Bender were able to provide further testimony on the issue of ocean war graves and the lack of protection for them. Additionally, during the study, the committee heard from officials from the Departments of National Defence and Transport, as well as Parks Canada Agency, on how the Government of Canada might fill this gap. From the study, the committee produced a report called Canada's Ocean War Graves, which contained a number of recommendations for the government. I would like to highlight two of them. Recommendation number 1 states that the Government of Canada draft new legislation similar to the United Kingdom's Protection of Military Remains Act to protect Canada's ocean war graves. And Recommendation 2 states that the Government of Canada explore all options for existing legislative and regulatory powers to provide immediate legal protection for ocean war graves on an interim basis until the bill is passed. These recommendations and the report as a whole were supported by all the members of the committee, which does clearly demonstrate the broad support this initiative has across party lines, although it hasn't been mentioned much to this point this morning. In its response to the committee's report, the ministers responsible for National Defence, Transport and Parks Canada indicated that the government would be open to supporting an amendment to C-64, which would allow for interim protection to be created. However, by the time the government's response was received by the committee, the bill had already passed the House and was under consideration by the Senate. I'm very relieved and pleased that the honourable senators took up this issue. In particular, the Honourable Fabian Manning of Newfoundland and Labrador drafted an amendment to the bill, which was adopted at Senate committee and subsequently supported by the Senate as a whole. This has brought us to the point where we are today. While I've highlighted the work done on this issue by our colleagues on the House of Commons Trans Committee, members of the Senate, the government, and advocates like Captain Bender and Patrick White, I would be remiss if I didn't note the broad support for the action on the issue by our public, by Canadians. An e-petition as well as regular paper petitions generated hundreds of signatures from Canadians across the country who called on this government to act. While these petitioners' ultimate desire was that standalone legislation be enacted to protect Canada's ocean war graves, they also did recognize the interim protection is better than no protection at all. I want to thank the many citizens who volunteered their time to circulate petitions and collect signatures in order to further highlight this issue to the government. I want to say that as Official Opposition Deputy Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs, I have many concerns and issues with this Liberal government's treatment of veterans and their issues. This Prime Minister won the hearts and minds of veterans during the last election by placing his hand over his heart and swearing that he would never take veterans to court and that he would provide them with lifelong pensions comparable to the old Veterans Charter. The then Minister of Justice, who is now the Minister of Veterans Affairs, did revive the Equitas court case and reinstated the lawyer that had been removed at the request of the veteran plaintiffs by the previous Conservative Minister of Veterans Affairs, the Member of Parliament for Durham. Today, our veterans know that, in their words, they were duped. On top of the betrayal to a public and written promise, the Prime Minister responded to a question by a veteran at his Edmonton Town Hall with, "They're asking for more than we can give."
As a point of order,
Mr. Speaker, I'd welcome a debate on veterans any day in comparison from this government and the Harper government. Having said that, we're talking about abandoned vessels, and I would ask that the member relate her comments at least somewhat closely to the legislation that's before us.
to the honourable member for Yorkton Melville to finish her speech. It seemed to be going in a different direction, but I'm sure she'll bring it back to the issue of the day. I'll leave it with her.
Speaker, I am bringing it back, and I would like to note that I am talking about veterans' issues and the fact in regards to ocean war graves, which is the focus of this debate and yet was not mentioned by the member across the floor. So I am returning to this issue definitely in regards to veterans. The Prime Minister signed off on a huge cash payout to Omar Khadr, and he affirmed Veterans Affairs funding going to treat PTSD of an individual who has never served a day in the Canadian military for PTSD incurred while murdering an off-duty police woman. The backlog in responses to benefit claims is now over 29,000 cases. And I will mention as well, providing access to personal service dogs as an option for treatment of mental health and physical injury has been delayed, and the significant issue around the treatment of methylene toxicity has been very difficult to get this government to focus on. However, I am extremely pleased to say that scientific research has been growing amongst our allies, and now this Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs has agreed to study new scientific findings about what our allies are doing on the issue of methylene, and that is a very good thing. Veterans are already anticipating validation of their anecdotal findings. The challenge will be to complete the study in time to submit a report and secure a response from the government before the House rises. I'll continue to advocate for Canada's veterans, Mr. Speaker, for the services that they need and for the benefits that they've earned. They deserve this, and Canadians expect it. And today, on this specific issue, I am pleased to say I support this move by the government, and I want to thank the Minister of Transport, through you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing his bill to be amended in order to provide Canada's ocean war graves interim protection. I look forward to the quick passage of this bill, and I hope the government will do all in its power to expedite the regulation development process so that the final resting places of our sailors and merchant mariners lost at sea are protected from desecration. It is these sailors, with the Royal Canadian Navy and mariners of the Merchant Navy, that I would like to thank before I end my speech. I would like to encourage all parliamentarians to come experience the Battle of the Atlantic parade and commemorative ceremonies on May 5th of this year at the National War Memorial. The struggle between the Allied and German forces for control of the Atlantic Ocean during World War II was the war's longest continuous battle. The need to keep the vital flow of men and supplies going between North America and Europe brought the war to Canada's doorstep. U-boats torpedoed ships within the sight of Canada's east coast and even in the St. Lawrence River. With Canada's Merchant Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, and the Royal Canadian Air Force playing a key role, the triumph in the Battle of the Atlantic came at a very high price. Nearly 400 Allied ships were sunk between January and July of 1942. More than 1,600 Merchant Navy personnel from Canada and Newfoundland were killed. Most of the 2,000 Royal Canadian Navy officers and men who died during the war were killed in this battle, along with 752 members of the Royal Canadian Air Force. 136 civilians also died when the ferry SS Caribou was sunk as it crossed from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland. These brave men, who paid the ultimate sacrifice in the defense of Canada, deserve our thanks for the price they and their loved ones paid. We can honor them today by speaking to this motion, to this recommendation, and by supporting these measures, which will provide protection to the final resting places of those who died at sea. We must remember them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her remarks, for having talked about veterans and people working at sea. The NDP will be supporting the Senate amendments when it comes to this aspect under C-64. I'd like to know what she thinks about the fact that the Senate and the Liberals rejected several amendments by the NDP that were put forth by my former colleague Sheila Malcolmson. She wasn't allowed to debate her bill. There was cooperation, collaboration, and buy-in by many chambers of commerce, many communities in British Columbia to improve the bill, because there are a number of shortcomings, especially when it comes to dealing with the pollution being caused by these ships, these vessels, so that vessels can't be abandoned if they're owned, to shift to the fiscal balance for the registration. Now, in my riding in Salaberry for the past 7 years, we've had the Catherine Spirit. It's a derelict vessel. It was abandoned by a company that wanted to dismantle it that couldn't, but it cost $24 million in taxpayers' dollars, in fact, to deal with it. If it had been covered by this bill, the company would have paid penalties. But because there isn't sufficient funding for the bill, ultimately, we don't know whether the federal government would have taken responsibility for it, but there are shortcomings in the bill. So does the honourable member think that the federal government should improve the bill to recycle vessels with the polluter pay principle, so that it's not taxpayers picking up the tab when vessel owners abandon their ships along the coastline?
In Melville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can resonate with the frustration of the member over the issues around what a particular party sees as a very good recommendation, a good decision for where the government should go, and the government chooses not to make those decisions. We certainly face that with bringing forward amendments on a number of different bills within committees, and find yourself stymied because the government has decided to go a specific direction. I know that they often, too, are frustrated when they are not able to bring forward or complete legislation that they would like to see take place. And that is the challenge of being in government and being in opposition. However, I can also say that the government's Ocean Protection Plan has some good parts to it and, in my perspective, some bad parts. While I don't find this particular bill emanating from the Ocean Protection Plan objectionable, obviously it's a very good move. One bill that is very objectionable to me and to millions of Canadians is the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act. The bill is nothing more than another step by the Liberals to attempt to phase out the oil sands. For the Liberals, Venezuelan oil in Quebec, totally fine. Saudi Arabian oil on the East Coast, good. But Canadian oil off of BC's northern coast is not okay. It reflects a double standard when it comes to protecting the environment.
And comments, the honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, based on the member's comments, I was more inclined to re-emphasize that as a government, all the wonderful initiatives that have been taken, and there's always room for us to look at other initiatives in terms of towards our veterans. To highlight one of the biggest differences, of course, would have been the reopening of offices, regional veterans offices across the country, the offices that the former Harper government had closed. But I'll try to be a little bit more relevant to the legislation. That was more of a response to the member's comments during her debate. And that is in regards to, if you take a look at the legislation, this is the second piece of legislation. I look at the moratorium as a positive thing. Canadians want us to protect our oceans. And not only have we committed substantial financial resources to do just that legislation, now we have a second piece of legislation looking at the abandonment of watercrafts. And I'm wondering if my colleague could just provide her thoughts in regards to specifically how this legislation will in fact move us forward in trying to ensure that there's more accountability to the owners of those watercrafts that have been actually abandoned in different areas of our country.
Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In response to veterans issues, I think that veterans would have liked to have heard this government focus on how important it is to protect those ocean war graves. And I haven't heard anything from them on the actual subject this morning. And quite honestly, when it comes to the moratorium on the coast in regards to these vessels that would be carrying oil, it's a very targeted bill that doesn't take into account thousands of other ships that come in and out of that port, bringing other, yes, hazardous products to and from Canada. So Canadians are very aware that this is a targeted move on behalf of the government to impact basically the development of our own Canadian economy at the expense of other economies.
Questions and comments, the honourable member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak a bit about the speech that my colleague from Yorkton Melville brought up. And I'm extremely happy that she did bring up the ocean war graves. And it's something that I'm very concerned with passionately myself. And I just want to bring to her attention and to the attention of the members in this House. I spent many years in northern British Columbia along the Alaska Highway, and I constantly heard and overheard stories of people going in and robbing our historic World War II crash sites. In fact, I know of an incident which I followed up on of a person going in and taking artifacts where there was a live body in the aircraft. Or not a live body, but a dead body in the aircraft. It's extremely important, and I want to stress that it's extremely important that we strengthen the laws to protect these historic sites and ocean war graves. And I'm glad that she brought it up, and I wonder if she would just mention the importance of protecting these people that served our great country to protect us and give us the freedoms that we have today, that we need to look further and support them further. Thank you, in their resting places.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
I want to thank my colleagues so much for those comments and for that question. That is the focus today, and believe me, having traveled with committee all over the country, specifically as an example, reaching out to our First Nations, Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit veteran communities, one thing that came up over and over again was the fact that a number of them who had passed away still didn't even have recognition with a grave site marker. And I can't imagine if I was the mother of a soldier facing that circumstance where that wasn't done. So there's that side of it. And then, of course, Canadians are appalled at the thought that we have nothing in place to protect these grave sites where our serving members lost their lives while in service and are being desecrated by individuals, unfortunately, who have no respect at all for the fact that these people have won them their freedom. So I do agree that we have to move forward with this and not be satisfied until we have legislation in place that very specifically and powerfully protects our ocean war graves as well as these other sites. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We have time for about a 30-second question. The honourable member for Port Neil Alberni.
First, I want to thank my colleague and friend from Yorkton. We serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee together and do some important work for veterans. Thank you for that. Mr. Speaker, what we haven't heard from the Conservatives is a proposal on how they're going to deal with abandoning and derelict vessels. They were in government for 10 years. They left coastal communities vulnerable. We saw the amount of derelict and abandoned vessels skyrocket with no action from the previous Harper government. In fact, John Duncan, who was the MP for Vancouver Island North, said, why didn't we should have something similar to Washington State, who has very robust legislation and deals with the vehicle owner-operator piece to ensure that there is someone that can pay for cleanups. Yet he was in cabinet and he sat in government for 10 years and we saw no action. In fact, John Weston also brought forward legislation that was never debated here in this House. So Conservatives from coastal communities weren't getting support from their own party from across this country. So I'd like to hear a proposal from the Conservatives of how they're going to deal with this issue, or do they even see this as a serious and important issue for coastal communities?
Member for Yorkton Melville, in 30 seconds or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do very much appreciate serving on Veterans Affairs Committee with this good colleague and friend of mine. However, I will say that we've come out clearly today indicating that we are in support of this part of the bill and in protecting our coastal waters. And I see this as a good move in that there's a responsibility there of the government to make sure that it's being taken care of in an appropriate way, but not at the expense of Canadian taxpayers. Thank you.
Reprise du débat, resuming debate. J'aimerais indiquer que l'honorable.
I'd like to inform the honourable member that she will have 10 minutes, after which we will need to interrupt debate. Following that, she will have another 10 minutes to wrap up her remarks. The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Order, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, an agreement could not be reached under the provisions of Standing Order 78.1 or 78.2 with respect to the third reading stage of Bill C-78, an act to amend the Divorce Act, the Family Orders and Agreements Enforcement Assistance Act, and the Garnishment, Attachment and Pension Diversion Act, and to make consequential amendments to another act. Under the provisions of Standing Order 78.3, I give notice that a Minister of the Crown will propose at the next sitting a motion to allot a specific number of days or hours for the consideration and disposal of proceedings at the said stage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise du débat. L'honorable député de Salaberry.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to start by saying that we will be supporting the Senate amendments for the components dealing with heritage value. We don't oppose it unless there are other issues, but we support the Senate amendment. So it's important for me to have this opportunity to speak to Bill C-64 because abandoned vessels exist across the country. This has been going on for a long time. It's costing taxpayers millions of dollars. This bill was tabled. Coastal communities in BC and other communities across the country support it. And I'd like to thank my former colleagues, Jean Crowder, as well as the new MLA, Sheila Malcolmson in BC, for the work that they did on this. They have made many statements in the House since 2015, since the last election, namely through Bill C-352. But one of the shortcomings of the bill, or several in fact, are the backlog, first of all, the number of abandoned vessels, the creation of a registration system, as well as the recycling of these vessels. Now, under Bill C-63, C-52 in the name of the member for, or Sheila Malcolmson. A secret ballot was requested, a secret vote. And as you can see, it happened again this week. The Liberals are making these decisions. They're deciding when democracy suits them and when it doesn't. In 2017,
I just want to remind the honourable members that the sounds really travels well in this new chamber, and it really works well. The engineers did a great job. Unfortunately, even when we whisper, it carries over, and it's rather loud. So I just want to remind everyone that continue to talk amongst yourself, but just remember to whisper rather than talk loudly or even talk across the floor. L'honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Roi.
The honourable member. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as I was saying, my colleague Sheila Malcolmson, with Bill C-52, brought forward a number of measures to propose solutions to the problems with abandoned vessels. That bill wasn't debated in the House because the Minister of Transport didn't want it to be debated. And she wanted to cooperate with the government, with the Minister of Transport, to make amendments to C-64, and 12 of the 13 amendments that she moved at committee were rejected by the Liberals. So where's the democracy when the Liberals say they want to work together in the interest of Canadians across the country, but they don't keep their word? Now, to continue, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about hundreds of vessels that are in the waters off the coast of BC and Newfoundland with the melting of ice and the opening up of the Northwest Passage. It's very important to have a bill like this to protect coastal waters and to clean up these derelict vessels. As you know, my riding wasn't spared these problems either. Now, I hope that I've spoken for the last time about the Catherine Spirit. It took many years of hard work to deal with that problem. It threatened drinking water in my riding and in Montreal. And that's why everyone mobilized so quickly. The Senate has made amendments to this bill. But unfortunately, the Senate didn't bring back any of the NDP's amendments. They ignored them completely, as the government did. However, there are some positive aspects in Bill C-64. It includes penalties and fines that have to be paid, and additional fines, including prison of up to 3 years. Any boat with large vessels also have to have insurance. Now, just to remind you of the situation of the Catherine Spirit that I mentioned earlier, it's a former tanker that had a draft of 9,261 tons. It was 153 meters long, 30 times the length set by this bill. And it contained heavy oil, PCBs, and other dangerous products. There were a number of times that the issue was raised in the House, letters, whatnot, put to the Minister, the Department of Transport over the past 7 years. So this action was taken under the previous Conservative government, and it was a hard-won battle after 7 years. And it was, in fact, thanks to the local people, mayors, and my team. And I'm very proud of that because we didn't give up. If the fines are a deterrent, that's one thing, but I hope that the regulations will help to avoid and prevent a number of problems. Oftentimes, we didn't know who was the lead on the issue, and at the last minute, We realize that it's important to take action before events occur. In 2016, work that was to be undertaken didn't. There was fear that the vessel would capsize. There was a great amount of fear surrounding the situation of the vessel in 2016. And they had to ensure that the tank didn't fill up again. We're talking about thousands of liters of contaminated waters in the hull. And action needs to be taken in order to implement the principle of the polluter pays. The Liberal government keeps talking about the importance of this principle, the fact that they believe in it, and they hammer out this message all the time when they talk about the carbon price on carbon. But when it came time to act, it took a long time for them to require the company involved, the Saint-Pierre, Company Saint-Pierre, the owner of the ship, and it had to issue 2 contracts for a total of some $20 million. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government is now making, or would you accept it if the government made you pay for picking up the garbage that you take into your curb? Well, I'm not sure that the government, anyone would accept this type of situation. This was a type of situation that occurred with Saint-Pierre, the company, and it even was subject to a report on Infoman. The cost of this program is $1.25 million per year, but that's the budget over 5 years. And a few moments ago, it cost more than $24 million, as I mentioned. That's what it cost Canadian taxpayers for one vessel, and that wiped out the entire budget for all abandoned vessels in Canada under Bill C-64. That's completely ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. It's irresponsible as well on the part of the Liberal government. There are thousands of these vessels that need to be dismantled. So the budget is simply a drop in the bucket. It's unfortunate that the minister refused to consider all of the amendments put forth by Sheila Malcolmson at committee. And I will have an opportunity after question period to describe them because I can see that I no longer have any time left. The honourable member for Salaberry-Sirois will have 11 minutes remaining once debate resumes on this matter.
Déclaration de député, the honourable member for Dartmouth, Cole Harbour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Literacy is very important to me. Last weekend, I had the opportunity to attend the Boys and Girls Club Family Literacy Day in Dartmouth North, where they gave out free books to youth in the community. It's important that we show kids how incredible reading can be. The books can take us away on magical journeys, provide us with knowledge, and sometimes, Mr. Speaker, they can make us laugh. Mr. Speaker, I apologize in advance because the book I picked up was the funniest and grossest joke book ever. So here goes. Mr. Speaker, what do you get when you cross a goat with a squid? Billy the Squid. What do you call a pirate droid? R2-D2, Mr. Speaker. And finally, Mr. Speaker, what do you call a pig who knows karate? Pork chop, Mr. Speaker. Pork chop. As I said, books help us learn. They make us laugh, and we can show kids from an early age that reading can be incredible and fun. The adventures and opportunities are endless. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to take foreign interference in our elections more seriously. We know that it is a major threat, and the Canadian security establishment has already recognized that it took place in the 2015 election. They also confirm it is expected to increase in the 2019 election. Yet the Liberals refuse to recognize to take steps to ensure our 2019 election will be free from foreign interference and influence. As Shadow Minister for Democratic Institutions, I'm concerned not only by the lack of detail in their most recent proposal, but their historic refusal to take the steps necessary to protect Canadians, as demonstrated in C-76. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we believe that every vote cast by a Canadian citizen matters. We will continue to fight against any attempt by foreign groups to undermine democracy in this country. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Sydney Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize a resilient community in Cape Breton. Through recent tough times, they persisted and kept their spirits high. The community is the employees of the Sydney Call Centre. On December 6th, just before Christmas, nearly 600 former employees were blindsided when they found out they would lose their jobs. Countless volunteers and organizations in Cape Breton quickly came together to fundraise and support these workers at such a tough time, including the Salvation Army, which handed out care baskets fully equipped with Christmas turkeys and also helped with bill payments and groceries. Shortly after Christmas, the new Sydney Call Centre opened and has been hiring these employees back. Thank you to these workers for keeping their heads high and showing how resilient Cape Breton is. Even in the toughest of times, we come together as a community to have each other's back. I would like to commend the work of all levels of government did, together with the manager, Todd Riley. Along with the member from Cape Breton Council, we'd like to thank the new owner, Anthony Marlowe, for seeing the strong work ethic and the great potential Cape Breton has to offer.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, the official languages situation in this country is taking a worrisome turn. New Brunswick has just withdrawn from organizing the Francophonie Games. The uncertain future of linguistic duality in that province is part of a series of threats weighing on official languages in Canada. There is talk of abolishing the Office of French Language Services and the French Language University of Ontario by Doug Ford's Conservative government, and there is uncertainty about school boards in Quebec. We have to act now. That is why, on the 50th anniversary of the Official Languages Act, the NDP is calling on the Prime Minister to hold a pan-Canadian summit on this issue. And I will be tabling a request before the Official Languages Committee so that a First Ministers Forum comes about to celebrate Canadian bilingualism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Mr. Speaker, our entrepreneurs and our small business owners are the foundation of our economy. They create good jobs, growth, and they build our communities. On January 22nd, I had the opportunity to have lunch with over 80 of these exceptional women and men, along with the Parliamentary Secretary, Richard Hébert. We shared measures that our government has taken to help SMEs grow, such as lowering taxes from 11 to 9%, supporting Canada's summer jobs, and investing $2 billion to support women entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to sincerely thank the Association des gens d'affaires de l'Île Perrot and the Vaudreuil-Soulanges Chamber of Commerce and Industry who made this event possible. I would also like to thank the SME owners for participating in this meeting and sharing their ideas to better support all those who are helping to build tomorrow's communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, Hadi, hello. I rise today to pay tribute to Clitley Today elder Mary Gucci. Mary passed away last Friday at the age of 97. She was at every community event, Mr. Speaker, and always had a smile for everyone. She prided herself on being able to figure things out and would tease she was a scientist, a finance minister, an engineer, and a professor. But, Mr. Speaker, most of all, Mary understood that our words connect us to our past. Our words and our music are two of the foundations of the human experience. Without them, we have no past. Without them, we have no future. And without them, we have no awareness of who we might be. Mary was a keeper of the Dakota language. She was one of the last fluent speakers of the Clitley dialect, and she did everything she could to help preserve the language. Mary had 10 children, 21 grandchildren, 30 great-grandchildren, and 11 great-great-grandchildren. But, Mr. Speaker, all of Prince George were her family, and she will be missed. Yakusta Bath in 10. God be with you.
Member for Kitchener South Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, as we enter the Super Bowl weekend with the New England Patriots versus the Los Angeles Rams, I rise to recognize and congratulate Greg White, a teacher at Jacob Hessler Secondary School and head coach of the Hessler HoC senior football team. Mr. White is a recipient of this year's Riddell High School Coach of the Year award. He was nominated by football parents Jen Papke, Dennis Fleming, and Daphne Nuiz Hall. Thanks to a local reporter, Mark Bryson, whose article about Greg White's award appeared in the Waterloo Regional this past Monday, Waterloo Regional Record. Mr. White was involved in starting up Hessler football program in 1992. He led the Hawks to their first All-Ontario Championships in November, following an undefeated record of 12-0 this past season. Congratulations, Greg White, and well done, Hessler Hawks.
Bravo! The Honourable Member for Buena Vista, Buren Trinity.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize and congratulate the athletes from my riding, many from very small communities that will be competing in the Canada Winter Games in Red Deer, Alberta from February 15th to March 3rd. From Buena Vista, Sarah Diamond, Clarenville, Deidre Patey, Jillian Coates, Rachel Dean, Tyler Green, Susan Dean. From Glovertown, Heidi Simpson. From Musgrave Harbour, Roger Head. From New Harbour, Jennifer Pollitt. From Northern Bay, Nancy Oliver. From Port Union, Gary Blackmore. And Red Harbour, Kathy Senior. Will be competing, coaching, and managing our athletes in hockey, cross-country skiing, figure skating, table tennis, badminton, wheelchair basketball, and biathlon. I want to express the immense pride of all of our communities, and we cannot wait for them to bring home the gold. On behalf of all of the residents of Buena Vista, Buren Trinity, and our entire province, best wishes for Team Newfoundland and Labrador in Red Deer, Alberta.
Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, I toured every part of my riding over the winter break, and what I discovered is that people are increasingly paying more because of the mistakes of this Prime Minister.
Shameful.
After record investment to create the rapid bus transit system, as we have no rail in the Okanagan, this Prime Minister killed the public transit tax credit.
Oh my God.
That costs people more to ride the bus. In rural communities like Karamias, they get hit hard with an ever-increasing carbon tax, and they have lost Greyhound service. Merritt has lost one lumber mill, and the other is facing pressures, and this Prime Minister could not get a softwood lumber deal done. Small family wineries are worried because this Prime Minister capitulated, and now USA wines will be sold in licensed BC grocery stores. Local governments that have community benefit agreements with the Trans Mountain Pipeline have had to shelve important projects because this Prime Minister has made no progress. There's a pattern here that all points to people paying more for the ongoing failures of this government and this Prime Minister.
Good job.
For Canada, Carlton.
It's February 1st, Mr. Speaker, and we all know what that means. Winterlude starts here in Ottawa. Les cérémonies d'ouverture vont marquer plusieurs.
There will be opening ceremonies that will mark the beginning of canal skating with crepes breakfast, Ottawa's famous beaver tails, ice sculptures, and all kinds of family adventures. Several activities will take place inside and out that will highlight Canada's cultural, artistic, and culinary diversity.
Parts of the country may complain about the cold weather. The tough Canadians here in Ottawa celebrate snow and ice. And I encourage all of my colleagues, and indeed everybody, to make their way to Winterlude and have some family fun. This year, Winterlude will run until the 18th of February and will end with an amazing Family Day activities. And so, Mr. Speaker, I invite you to join all my intrepid constituents of Canada Carleton. Come have some fun on the ice.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, last week was Small Business Week. I had the opportunity to travel throughout many ridings in Quebec to meet innovative and creative entrepreneurs. I also had the good fortune to welcome the Minister of Tourism, Official Languages and Francophonie, Mélanie Joly, to my region, Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. Tourist businesses are small and medium businesses that contribute to the economic development of our regions. The tourism industry represents approximately 8,000 jobs in the region of Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. My region is renowned for its natural environment in both winter and summer, whether it's Indigenous tourism in the community of Mashtuas or Saint-Félicien Zoo or the Blueberry Bicycle Trail. I am proud to represent a riding in a region renowned for its legendary welcoming spirit and natural riches. Welcome to Blueberry Land. Before moving on to the next speaker, I would just like to remind members that one must never refer to the name of a member or to his or her position. So just a quick reminder for those of you who may have forgotten that over the Christmas break.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hardworking families in my riding of Markham Unionville are worried. They are worried about Justin Trudeau's out-of-control spending, the tax.
Remind everybody about what I just said. I'll say it in English this time. That when we're referring to someone in the House, we refer to them by their title, not by their name. The honourable member, I'll let him continue.
Mr. Speaker, the hardworking families in my riding of Markham Unionville are worried. They are worried about PM's out-of-control spending, the tax hikes, and failure to get things done on the issues that matter most to them. When you are working hard to support your family, the last thing you need is someone adding more tax burden. The last thing you need is a Prime Minister who doesn't understand the struggle that regular hardworking Canadians face every day.
That's right.
PM has no problem raising taxes and making everyday life more expensive and more difficult, and make no mistake, he will continue to raise taxes to pay for his mistakes. Canadians deserve better, Mr. Speaker.
Yes,
they deserve a government that will lower taxes, put people first, and make Canadians proud on the world stage once again, a conservative government.
The honourable member for London West.
Mr. Speaker, February is Heart Month. Heart disease affects approximately 2.4 million Canadian adults and is the second leading cause of death in Canada. That is why organizations such as the Cardiac Arrhythmia Network of Canada, or CANNET for short, are so important. CANNET is based in London and brings together healthcare professionals, academia, industry, not-for-profit, and patient input to support new ideas and groundbreaking research on arrhythmia and related heart conditions. I recently had the opportunity to visit CANNET and see firsthand the work they are doing. Their research and first-of-its-kind technology will have significant impact not only on Canadians suffering from arrhythmias, but also on caregivers and for Canada's healthcare system at large. I applaud CANNET for its important work and encourage all members in this House to join me in raising awareness on cardiovascular health this month. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Desnete, Mississippi, Churchill River.
Mr. Speaker, on January 22, 2016, 2 teachers and 2 young men lost their lives. 7 others were injured when a shooter entered the Dena High School in the Lodge. In 3 years since the date, both levels of government have honored the lives, the first responders, and worked to move forward from the tragedy in my home. But today, I want to recognize the support staff and community members who saved so many lives. Many teachers have told me privately the things that they did to make sure the kids were safe, even when it meant putting themselves in harm's way. Thank you for their quick thinking and commitment to their students. Though many of these teachers have left to take care of their mental well-being, they insisted on staying on to complete the year and help the kids they saved that day. Your actions have been forgotten by the Saskatchewan and federal governments in the past several years. So let's now take a moment to say thank you for what you did. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here we are at the end of this Liberal government's mandate, so I thought I would tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a Prime Minister who said he was a leader, a champion for the environment, for Indigenous peoples and veterans. He talked about budgets balancing themselves and how his government would help all those who are working hard and the middle class. He even said that Canada was back on the international stage. We all remember his colorful trip to India, his relationship with Saudi Arabia, China, and our main economic ally, the United States. What a story, Mr. Speaker. What a disaster. The sad truth is that after 3 years, the Prime Minister has done nothing in Canada's interests. He doesn't keep his word. He doesn't honour his commitments. On top of that, after only 3 years, he has left us with an out-of-control astronomical deficit. Fortunately, this is a time of economic prosperity. But speaking of fortune, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are, in fact, fortunate. On October 21st, they'll be able to choose a real government, a conservative government, with a real Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who will give us Canadians back the pride and prosperity they deserve. The Honourable Member for Hull-Elmer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the 4th year in a row, I'm rising in this House to invite all Canadians to celebrate Black History Month. Over the past 4 years, I have met dozens of community groups, hundreds of leaders, academics, professors, and workers.
We once divided ourselves into narrow interests based on where we or our ancestors came from. More and more, we are a woke community that is working together to achieve a common interest, to be equal and to be treated as equal. Equals in business, in studies, in law, in culture, in innovation, in politics, in government, in citizenship. Equal in citizenship.
I encourage all Canadians to participate in Black History Month events.
I say standing still is a luxury we cannot afford. Get more involved. Representation matters, not only in government, but in every nook and cranny of our society. Though each may feel alone, together we will accomplish great things. Vive le moi!
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Before the election, the Prime Minister said the budget would balance itself by this year. After the election, we found out that there would be a $20 billion deficit this year. Before the election, the Prime Minister said the deficit would be gone by 2019. After the election, we learned that won't happen until the year 2040. Before the election, the Prime Minister now is promising goodies. After the election, we know that will come with higher taxes. Will the government tell Canadians before the election how much it will raise taxes after the election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Before the election, the Conservatives added $150 billion to Canada's debt. Mr. Speaker, before the election, the Conservative government failed to produce growth, to generate growth in this country, and saw the worst record on practically every economic indicator since the Great Recession. Before the election, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives gave tax breaks after tax breaks to the wealthiest. After the election, Mr. Speaker, we lowered taxes for the middle class. With the Canada Child Benefit, we higher taxes for the wealthiest 1%, and we delivered the best results in the G7 in 2017, the fastest growth, 800,000 jobs.
For Carleton.
Actually, the Conservative government before the last election led our country out of the greatest global recession since the 1930s, with the lowest debt, the lowest unemployment, and the greatest job growth. And as for the debt, they on the other side said, spend more, spend faster, build up more debt. Good thing we ignored them and left them with a balanced budget. Now, we know that the growing deficits that the Prime Minister is imposing on Canadians today will lead to higher taxes tomorrow if, God forbid, that party is re-elected. Why won't they tell the truth about that before the election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's look at the facts. Canadians have seen their taxes decrease under this government, and I'm looking at what the OECD came out with this last summer, saying that a Canadian family, an average Canadian family, is getting $2,000 more in their pockets under this government this year than they were under the previous government. So focused were they on giving tax breaks after tax breaks to the wealthiest Canadians. We took a different approach, and yes, we did invest in science after they left us a deficit in investments in science and infrastructure in our First Nations people, Mr. Speaker. We took a different approach. We decided to invest, and the results speak for themselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bravo. Member for Carleton.
Well, listen, isn't that typical rhetoric from this trust fund prime minister? They said that mothers who put their kids in hockey or soccer are too rich, and so they took away the children's fitness tax credit. They said students who buy textbooks or pay for tuition are too rich and therefore should lose their textbook and education tax credits. They said that passengers in public transit are too rich and therefore should lose their transit tax credit. But they protect the family fortune of the Prime Minister. Isn't that just a little bit rich coming from them?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the tax credit he's referring to failed. They didn't work to increase public transit use. They benefited the wealthiest, and yes, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker. According, Mr. Speaker, to all studies that have been done, on these tax rates, they were ineffective. The Canada Child Benefit, on the other hand, is lifting 300,000 kids out of poverty in Canada, reducing child poverty by 40%. And he should ask in his writings what difference it makes to get the Canada Child Benefits that's tax-free, that's more generous, and that's lifting all these kids out of poverty. It's making a...
Before I go to the next question, which I'm sure is going to be an outstanding question, and we're going to get an outstanding answer, but I would certainly like to hear it, and I want to remind everyone how the sound works well in here, that when you're whispering even, it prevents the speaker from hearing the answer.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, this week I took the bus in Ottawa and also in Quebec in the riding of Louis Hébert, and I can tell you I didn't meet any millionaires in the bus. Now, I don't want to be a downer here, but I've got some bad news. Unfortunately for the Prime Minister, budgets don't balance themselves. And unfortunately for Canadians, they have been taken to the cleaners by the Liberals, who tried to make them believe that the balance would be that the budget would be balanced by 2019, but that's not true. When will it be balanced? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to deficits, it's important to remember that the debt-to-GDP ratio has been going down steadily. Thanks to the investments we've made, we've seen very strong economic growth in Canada, the strongest in the G7. We've had 800,000 jobs created in the last 3 years. Now, just to clarify something about the tax credits, I'd like to mention this article from the CBC, which did an analysis based on the PBO's report. They said that the public transit tax credit did nothing to increase public transit use. The sports credit did almost nothing to increase sports participation, and it helped wealthier families. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, I would invite my colleague across the way to take the bus with me next week, and then maybe he can see some of the people in the bus, and maybe he can tell them, look, the CBC says that you were taking advantage of the system. Well, good luck with that, Mr. Speaker. Good luck. The reality is this, Mr. Speaker. For 3 years, they tried to make Canadians believe that budgets balance themselves and that it would be balanced in 2019, but that's not the case, Mr. Speaker. Once again, what is the government's plan to balance the budget as promised? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I'd be curious to see the families in his riding who were using the public transit tax credit, and I would be happy to go to his riding and to meet the over 21,000 children whose families are receiving $68 million per year in the Canada Child Benefit. That's what's really making a difference.
For Essex.
Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the Liberals campaigned on a progressive platform. People expected change, but all they got from this Liberal government is an economy economy that just doesn't work for them. Plant closures and precarious work have left many people on shaky ground. Today, Canadians are faced with some of the biggest personal debt in decades. And instead of helping them get through it, the Liberals give billions away to corporations. How exactly is this a change from the Conservatives? How can this Prime Minister pat himself on the back while Canadians are struggling to pay their bills?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would submit to the honourable member that...
Oh, really? I just wanted to stop the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary so we could all hear the Honourable member's conversation between the two of them across the floor, which really shouldn't be happening. So I just want to remind them not to shout across the floor while there's a question being asked or answered. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I would submit to the honourable member that our focus from day one has been helping the middle class and those working hard to join the middle class. That's why we lowered taxes for the middle class. That's why we increased the Canada Child Benefit, made it tax-free. That's lifting 300,000 kids out of poverty, Mr. Speaker. That's why we increased the guaranteed income supplement that's helping close to 1 million seniors across the country with more money at the end of the month and at the end of the year. That's the approach we've taken, smart investments to make this society a more just and equal society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Essex.
Mr. Speaker, they just don't get it. Canadians are feeling let down by this Liberal government. They don't want to wait any longer, and they shouldn't have to wait for action on things that matter to them. If this Prime Minister was on the side of Canadians, he would have invested in solutions that people need: housing, universal pharmacare, and secure retirement. Instead, like the Conservatives, he chooses to give billions away to the rich while everyone else struggles. If this Prime Minister is really proud, how can he be standing up when Canadians are $200 away from bankruptcy?
The Honourable Minister for Infrastructure.
Canadian, Mr. Speaker, because what the member does not understand is that we've made historic investment in Canadians. $187 billion, Mr. Speaker, in mobility and connectivity. We're building roads, bridges, we're building community center, we're giving work to workers, families, communities are seeing better. We're building the Canada of the 21st century, Mr. Speaker. Green, resilient, and modern. That's investing in Canadians. That's what we're doing. That's what we'll continue to do.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report has confirmed what the NDP has always said. Buying the Trans Mountain Pipeline was not a good decision. The Liberals overpaid for outdated infrastructure that will only lose value. Canadians are facing record debt levels, and instead of helping them, the Liberals are choosing to take our money and buy an aging pipeline. Can you believe it? Why are the Liberals always choosing to help big companies instead of the people who really need help?
The
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thanks, Mr. Speaker. When 98% of our oil exports are going to the U.S., Canadians understand that we need to diversify our markets in order to get a fair price for our resources and create good jobs in Canada. The government trusts our energy sector, and we will continue to move forward with the Trans Mountain Pipeline while protecting the environment and leading constructive consultations. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, when they bought Trans Mountain, the Liberals broke their promise to protect the environment and to fight climate change. And according to Équiterre, every dollar invested in renewable energy generates 6 to 8 times more jobs than a dollar invested in fossil fuels. But despite this, the Liberals still decided to give away billions to big oil companies. Why are the Liberals investing in the energy sources of the past instead of the energy sources of the future? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Parliamentary Budget Officer said, if the Trans Mountain Pipeline is going to have an impact on Canada's economy, it's going to be a very significant one. As I said, the vast majority of our oil exports go to the U.S., and Canadians know it's important to diversify our markets. That's why we're going to move forward responsibly with the Trans Mountain expansion.
Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, this government spending is completely out of control. Year after year of massive deficits with absolutely no end in sight. Now, Canadians know that the only way for this Prime Minister to pay for his spending is to raise taxes. Today's deficits are tomorrow's tax hikes. People are struggling to get by under this government, and they deserve to know how much their taxes will increase. When are the Liberals going to come clean about their plans to raise taxes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it's important to remind the member opposite that, on the contrary, when we came to power, we decreased taxes for 9 million middle-class Canadians, and we increased taxes for the wealthiest 1%. We came forward with the CCP, which is extremely generous, and we also made investments after 10 years of the Conservatives' lack of vision. We made investments in infrastructure and science to ensure that we would have the basis for long-term prosperity in Canada. Our plan is working, and we've had one of the strongest growth rates in the G7. We've created 800,000 jobs, and our debt-to-GDP ratio is constantly declining.
In Millville.
Speaker, many Canadians, including our injured and retired veterans, are $200 away from not being able to pay their bills each month. The Prime Minister's vast family fortune means he doesn't have to worry about a few $100 as he introduces a carbon tax that will increase the cost of everything from gas to food to home heating. Government documents do reveal that the carbon tax will have to go up. When will this Prime Minister come clean and tell us the final cost of his carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
I'm delighted to stand up and talk about how we're putting a price on pollution in an affordable way. A family of 4 in Ontario will get $307 back, which is more than 810 families pay. We are concerned about affordability. The Conservative Party, unfortunately, isn't. They voted against the increase in the Canada. They voted against the Canada Child Benefit. They voted against increasing taxes on the 1%, decreasing them on the middle class. They voted against putting a price on pollution. They believe it should be free to pollute. We're going to continue to take action that makes life affordable and also takes action on climate change.
Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have received over 600 comments regarding the Liberal carbon tax. George wrote me from my riding saying, people are losing their homes because this extra expense and the rebates do not come close to paying for it. Well, Kenneth commented that he believes a carbon tax is ludicrous and that at some point we're going to need an FLD tax, the Fixing Liberal Deficit Tax, for all those misspending. When will the Prime Minister stop making Canadians pay for his mistakes?
Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to talk directly to the residents in the members' riding that we are committed to making life affordable. That's why we increased tax on the 1% so we could reduce them on the middle class. That's why we increased the Canada Child Benefit so more families, more in his riding, will have more money and we can raise kids out of poverty. That's why we're also taking action to put a price on pollution and giving more money back to families so life will be affordable while we tackle the biggest challenge of our generation. But the big question is, why doesn't the party opposite understand the environment and the economy go together, that you need to tackle climate change and you can do it in an affordable way?
The Honourable Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, no one believes the Liberal election gimmick of rebating people more money than they have to pay in carbon taxes. It's ridiculous. Make no mistake, the carbon tax will go up. In fact, the Liberals' own document shows that it could cost the average family of 4 up to $5,000 after the election. Why don't they just come clean and tell the truth for once, that their carbon tax will go up and cost Canadians more money for the necessities of life, like buying groceries, driving their cars, and heating their homes? Why don't they just tell them the truth?
Minister of the Environment.
I'm happy to talk about the truth, but let's be clear. Action on climate change is not a gimmick. That we need to take action on climate change. We need to do it in an affordable way. I wish the party opposite would stop misleading Canadians. That you can put a price on pollution, you can reduce emissions, you can foster innovation and clean solutions, and you can make life affordable by giving money back. Economists show it. The province of BC shows it. That if you talk to Canadians, you know what they want? They want a serious plan to tackle climate change, and they want us to make life affordable, and we're doing both.
Member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, instead of delivering their promised plan to save jobs in Oshawa, Liberals have voted 3 times against motions, Conservative motions, to help our General Motors workers. The Prime Minister didn't even bother to show up in Oshawa. Instead, he gave in to Donald Trump and signed an agreement without having the steel and aluminum tariffs removed. And now, Mr. Speaker, he's raising payroll taxes and he's forcing a job-killing carbon tax on hardworking Canadian families while giving the biggest emitters a pass and hiding its full cost. Mr. Speaker, why do workers in Oshawa have to pay for the mistakes of this Prime Minister with their jobs?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. General Motors made a clear mistake in abandoning the workers in Oshawa. Our government supports auto workers and their families. We have been very consistent and clear in this position when we've met with GM, unions, and municipal and provincial counterparts. We've discussed the facilities in Brampton, Ingersoll, St. Catherine, and Windsor. Our government will always stand up for auto workers.
The honourable member for Oshawa.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the people of Oshawa know if they're standing up for auto workers, where are they? They're not standing up in Oshawa or around Ontario anywhere. Tax after tax, mistake after mistake. Life has become much more expensive for Canadians, and this Prime Minister and the Liberals have voted against Oshawa and its auto workers. While he's going around the country campaigning on our tax dollars, Oshawa and Durham Region's auto sector are about to lose more than 15,000 jobs as a result of this Prime Minister's inaction. Enough's enough. Why do auto workers in Oshawa have to pay for this Prime Minister's mistakes with their job?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, we're not going to take any lessons from the Conservatives. We are supporting our auto workers. When they were in power for the last 10 years, the Conservatives lost 40,000 jobs in the auto sector. The Stephen Harper Conservatives left unused money in the Innovation Fund and refused to make the changes recommended by industry and workers. Thanks to our Strategic Innovation Fund, we are making significant investments for our highly skilled workers and for the future.
Member for Desete, Mississippi, Churchill River.
The Liberals are doing nothing to help the homeless in northern Saskatchewan. Scattered sites served a record number of meals last year. Now they're being forced to find a new building to meet the growing demand in La Ronge. The people who rely on shelters like these are elders, young children, families, and students. Meanwhile, the Liberals are all talk and no action. When will the Liberals commit serious and concrete funding to help the homeless in La Ronge?
The Honourable Minister of Families and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you see, many members of our government are most interested in issues towards constructing more affordable homes for all Canadians, and that also means reducing chronic homelessness in our country. One Canadian on the streets in this country is one too many, and that's why we are going ahead with our historic plan to fight homelessness by at least 50%, by investing in communities across Canada, and by doing this in partnership with many others who have waited for so long for renewed federal leadership and partnership on housing.
Member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, news of the Canada Housing Benefit led the Sask Party government to end its rental supplement for low-income people. This is a small subsidy that made a big difference to keep people in good homes. Many living in my riding, like Roberta Fair, need support to keep their housing affordable. Otherwise, homelessness will become a reality. It's wrong to make people wait until 2020 to have a roof over their heads. Will the Liberal government take action now, not later, to help people like Roberta? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From day one, we have made it very clear that we believe that every Canadian has a right to have access to a safe and affordable home. That's why we invested since 2016 $5.7 billion, helping 1 million families have access to the home that is so important for themselves, for their families, and for their communities. That's why we're going to invest $40 billion in the next 10 years for the first ever historic national housing strategy, which is going to transform the way in which the government of Canada is going to be helpful for communities across Canada.
Member for Sturgeon River, Parkland.
The Parliamentary Budget Officer has reported that the value of the Trans Mountain Pipeline has dropped by $700 million because the Prime Minister failed to get the project built. And that's just the beginning. Every day of delay means fewer jobs for energy workers, and it's costing our economy millions. When will the Prime Minister stop making Canadians and energy workers pay for his mistakes?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians understand that we need to reduce our dependency when it comes to exporting our oil to the United States. We need to expand our global market, and that's exactly what we are focused on. We are moving forward on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion in the right way, with meaningful consultation with the indigenous peoples, at the same time making sure that we're looking after the environment. This is a project that's very important to the Canadian economy, but the only way to move forward on this is making sure that we respect indigenous peoples and we respect our environment.
Right on. Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's lack of leadership on the Trans Mountain Pipeline has already cost Canadians $4.5 billion. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed that if the Prime Minister does not get this project moving, taxpayers will continue to lose up to $1 billion every single year. Yet 9 months have gone by and the Liberals still have no plan in place. When will the Prime Minister stop making Canadians pay for his mistakes?
The Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the NEB review of the marine shipping and its impact on the marine environment is underway, and NEB is going to report to us on February 22nd. We have 8 teams currently consulting in a meaningful way, two-way dialogue with Indigenous peoples, something that we owe to Indigenous peoples to make sure their voices are heard, their voices are included in the decision making, something that previous government failed to do. We are moving forward on this project in the right way, making sure it moves forward with proper consultation and looking after the environment.
Great job. Number 4, Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians can no longer afford to pay for this Prime Minister's pipeline mistakes. Nope. The Parliamentary Budget Officer said clearly the Liberals grossly overpaid for the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and every single year construction is delayed, costs Canadian taxpayers another $700 million. Wow. Clearly, the Liberals have no intention to ever build this pipeline, which is now in regulatory purgatory. Will they just finally admit that this Prime Minister is keeping his promise to phase out Canada's oil sector?
Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is very disappointing to hear a member from Alberta who does not believe that getting our resources to non-U.S. markets by building the pipeline capacity is necessary for jobs in Alberta, for our energy sector. We are investing in this project. It's good for the Canadian economy. It's good for Alberta's economy. We owe it to Alberta workers. We owe it to energy sector workers throughout the country to moving forward on this project in the right way with meaningful consultation with Indigenous communities, at the same time making sure we are reducing the impact on the environment. Thank you so much.
For Foothills.
What is extremely disconcerting is a minister from Alberta in the government is doing nothing to stand up for Alberta's energy sector. What the Parliamentary Budget Officer said is that every year that construction is delayed on Trans Mountain Pipeline costs Canadian taxpayers $700 million a year. In fact, if it is not built by 2022, the project is no longer viable at all. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have put billions of tax dollars at risk, and by continuing to delay this very important project, Canadian taxpayers are seeing their dollars wasted. Why is the Prime Minister forcing Canadians to pay for his pipeline mistakes?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Canadians are paying the failure of a decade of Harper government, where they failed to build a single pipeline to get our resources to non-U.S. global markets. When they got into office in 2006, 99% of Alberta oil was sold to one single customer, the United States. When they left in 2015, 99% of Alberta oil was still sold to a single customer, the U.S. That's how they failed to diversify Alberta's oil exports. We're working hard on this project, at the same time exploring new markets.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, for far too long, the Canadian government has enabled companies to shirk their environmental responsibilities, and when they do so, taxpayers are stuck with the bill. Yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled on the Redwater file that companies have the legal obligation to clean up abandoned wells in bankruptcy proceedings. The Liberals have an opportunity to show how important, or that they're putting the interests of people ahead of big money. Will they take steps to ensure that the legislation clearly requires them to do this cleanup, yes or no? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we are currently examining the decision by the Supreme Court of Canada to look at the possible repercussions on the Canadian economy. The government understands the importance of protecting the environment and the energy and sustainable energy sector. We seek to establish a balance between environmental responsibilities, companies' ability to restructure, and to preserve jobs when it comes to resolving bankruptcy.
Mr. Speaker, families from coast to coast were struggling with the cost of living, and they shouldn't be on the hook for the cost of cleaning up abandoned oil wells or contaminated mine sites. Yesterday, the Supreme Court agreed, saying that bankruptcy is not a license to ignore the rules. For too long, Liberal and Conservative governments have let companies escape their responsibilities. But the Liberals have a chance to show whose side they're on, Canadians or corporations. Will they allow companies to walk away from their obligations, or will they make sure Canadians don't have to pay the cost?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government understands the importance of effective environmental protection regimes as well as sustainable and prosperous energy resource sector. Our insolvency laws are designed to balance environmental obligations, the ability of Canadian companies to restructure and preserve jobs, and the fair treatment of creditors. We are now reviewing the Supreme Court of Canada's decision to assess the potential impact and implication for our marketplace framework, laws, and the Canadian economy. Thank you.
Well, member for Toronto Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians saw the travel of hundreds of thousands of passengers at London Gatwick Airport in December because of a drone incident. And we remember an accident in Quebec City between a drone and a plane. Travelers in Toronto are concerned about possible disruptions and incidents involving drones and planes. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transportation please advise as to what new regulations will do to improve safety between drones and around airports? Thank you.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Speaker, I would like to thank my friend from Toronto Danforth for an excellent question. Starting June 1st, our new rules will require drone pilots on drones over 250 grams to take an online course in safety and proper handling. Drone pilots will also be required to keep their drones away from airports and to register them. Mr. Speaker, through you to all traveling Canadians, we will continue to take concrete measures to keep air travel in Canada safe. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pont-Neuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, what's the problem with a single tax return for Quebec? They're the only Canadian citizens required to do 2 tax returns. The Liberal government is trying to scare employees at the agency and say that they would lose their jobs. Our leader had said there wouldn't be any jobs lost. And contrary to the Liberals, we honour our commitments. What's this contempt towards Quebecers? Why is the Liberal government saying no to a single tax return in Quebec? The Honourable Minister. Once again, we can see that the Conservatives are playing petty politics by making empty promises that they have no intention to keep. The agency hires more than 5,500 people across Quebec and is an economic driver that is important for cities like Shawinigan and Jonquière. Contrary to the Conservatives, we will not jeopardize those jobs. Having said that, we're always open to working with Revenue Quebec to facilitate this work. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Revenue obstinately rejects Quebec's legitimate request. In my humble opinion, a single tax return for all Quebecers is a reasonable ask by the National Assembly. But saving Quebecers time and money simply doesn't seem to be a Liberal value. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers won't forget the minister's simplistic arguments next October. Why is the minister acting as a mouthpiece for the centralizing government instead of opening her eyes and looking at the best interest of all Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of Revenue. Quebecers will remember during the next election campaign is the Conservative cuts. They cut when they were in power. That's what they'll remember, Mr. Speaker. That's what they did over 10 years. And over the past 3 years, we have invested in the Revenue Agency. We've invested in our call centers. We simplified the tax return. We invested in community programs for volunteers. We've encouraged low-income Canadians to produce a tax return. We are working on behalf of Canadians and Quebecers, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lise, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. The extreme drought in 2018 was worse than the one the previous year, and many agriculture producers in my riding and from across Quebec have faced considerable losses. Unfortunately, many of them are on the verge of abandoning their production because compensation under agri-stability are insufficient or almost non-existent. The Quebec Department of Agriculture, Financière Agricole of Quebec, and the UPA have all urged the Liberal government to review the parameters for assessing losses. What is the government waiting for to take some action? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, our government has always defended farmers and farming families. We invested some $100 million in science and innovation in the agriculture sector, which is different from the time under the Conservatives, where the budget was significantly lower. We are in a position to strengthen the sector, to provide tools, and to help Canadian farmers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lise, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Well, Mr. Speaker, haven't opted into the crop insurance program for years. They expect conversation for the losses that they've been subjected to. Now, Agriculture Canada acknowledged a mistake in their assessment methods and is ready to proceed with adjustments for 2019. But we've learned that they're refusing to take action for 2018 at the expense of producers who went through an extreme drought. Why is the government abandoning producers in my riding and in eastern Quebec? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate that while the Conservatives were in power, they cut $700 million out of the agriculture budget. We invested $350 to help the dairy sector. And we will continue to work to create growth and opportunities for farmers in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, if this government really wanted to help Canadian workers and small businesses, they would have stood up to Trump and refused to sign a trade deal that would compromise Canada's future. Canadian workers are tired of paying the heavy price of losing jobs because the Liberals failed to do everything in their power to lift the devastating tariffs on steel and aluminum. These tariffs have caused layoffs, and some companies are being forced to close shop across the country. Why are the Liberals refusing to stand up to Canadian steelworkers and small businesses?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The illegal and unjustified U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum must be lifted. That is a message we are delivering to the United States, and it's working. Last month, U.S. lawmakers from both sides of the aisle told U.S. Trade Representative to lift these tariffs. Just this week, Kevin Brady, a top-level Republican, said they must be lifted before Congress considers the new NAFTA deal. Right. We will never stop fighting for our workers and against these tariffs. Thank you.
For Courtney Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, we've heard about unaffordable housing in big cities, but Courtney has now joined the ranks of the world's least affordable housing markets. Marcy, a single woman from the Comox Valley, was living in her van and finally found a camper to live in, but it's not on properly zoned land. There is nowhere to live in the community, and she's been living in fear that she'll be evicted. And sure enough, this week, she's been told that she has to move. The Liberals might pat themselves on the back, but the reality is people still have nowhere to live. How can they spin their talking points when people like Marcy have nowhere to go?
The Honourable Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From day one, we made it very clear that every Canadian has a right to have access to a safe and affordable place to live and to be safe and to live in dignity. And that's why we have invested since 2016 $5.7 billion, helping 1 million families and therefore well over 1 million Canadians. And that's why we're going to keep investing in housing for Canada, for Canadians, because of the neglect of previous governments in Canada. We are entering a new era in housing, Mr. Speaker. We have a lot of work to do, and we look forward to doing it.
Député de Charlesbourg, Saint-Charles.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Norman affair is proved that this government is not open and transparent as it had promised. Justice lawyers are obstructing the transfer of documents to Admiral Norman's defence team. The Minister of Defence seems to want to subvert the access to information system. Why is the Prime Minister hiding the truth, and who is he protecting? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, the prosecution office is independent of the government and my office. They are looking after this affair. It is fulfilling all obligations before the court when it comes to the communication of documents. This matter is before the courts, and it would be inappropriate to make any further comment on it.
Member for Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Defence was on the stand at the Norman trial yesterday. Ms. Astervas was questioned about efforts in the Prime Minister's office to delay the documents in the Norman trial. Can the Prime Minister assure this House that there was no coordinated effort to delay this court case until after the election?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Speaker, as I just said in French, the prosecution in question is being handled by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, which operates independently from the Department of Justice and my office. Counsel to the Attorney General of Canada is fulfilling all of its obligations before the court with respect to third-party records applications. It is improper, Mr. Speaker, for me to comment further this matter being before the courts.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
Mr. Speaker, what's improper is that the Prime Minister moved the Dalton McGuinty Kathleen Wynne team to Ottawa to help run his office, including Ms. Astervas. She was part of the Liberal team in Ontario that used code words like apple, fruit salad, and vapor to delay and prevent the release of documents in the gas plant scandal. I see a pattern, Mr. Speaker. It's clear the same thing is happening now in the case of the Kraken. Right on. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. That's the code word for Admiral Norman. When will the Prime Minister stop doing things from the Kathleen Wynne cover-up playbook?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member well knows, according to the sub judice principle, best articulated by former Member of Parliament Peter Van Loan, members are expected to refrain from discussing matters before the courts or under judicial consideration in order to protect those involved, in order to give them the ability to have a fair trial and to be heard in court. Mr. Speaker, the matter will be tried in court, and according to Mr. Van Loan, it is not only improper for me to answer, it is improper for the honourable member to ask the question.
Right. The Honourable Member for London North Centre.
Mr. Speaker, with winter holidays upon us, many Canadians are considering a holiday in the South.
Children and social development tell this House how this government is making it easier for Canadians to access passport services regardless of where in Canada they live.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for London North Centre, for his question and his excellent French and for his hard work. We were elected to help the middle class and to help more Canadians, and that means delivering good quality services for Canadians. And that's why I'm so happy to announce that Canadians have 300 service centres for passports across the country. This is twice as many centres, passport service centres, than under Harper, and we are very proud because the Canadian government is serving Canadians. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fleur. Mr. Speaker, the tariffs on steel and aluminum are hurting companies. The Liberal government promised compensation to support the steel and aluminum sectors, and companies are still waiting. The government collected $1 billion in the retaliatory tariffs. So why, Mr. Speaker, are steel and aluminum companies in the Saguenay and across the country still paying for the Prime Minister's mistakes, the mistakes he made while negotiating? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind the member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fleur that we have a $2 billion program for companies that are affected. But to give some examples on the type of investment that we've made in recent months and the past year, we've invested $90 million in Algoma Steel that will create 50 jobs and protect 3,000 others. But something closer to home from him that he should know, because I'm sure he's read our announcements, $60 million in Rio Tinto to support many jobs and invest in new technology. We are committed to supporting the steel and aluminum sector, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier.
Government has said that it is a small business-friendly government committed to helping small businesses start up, scale up, and access new markets.
In my riding of Ottawa-Vanier, small businesses hire and employ a great number of people and contribute to stimulating the growth of our local economy.
To small business and export promotion, share with this House what our government has done to make it easier for small businesses to create good-paying jobs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and the government is working hard to make that easier for them. We have cut the tax rate for small business to 9% as of the start of January, in order to help them save money and to give them the lowest tax rate. We are cutting burdens, administrative burdens, and reviewing regulations in order to simplify business. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives often say that they supported businesses, but we saw that they abandoned them during their 10-year period. They just...
Mr. Speaker, 2 Canadian children were kidnapped and taken to a hostile foreign country, littered with no-go zones where Hezbollah roams freely. Suicide and car bombings and rocket fire are not uncommon. Yet this Prime Minister is letting their mother, Shelley Bayek, fend for herself. Only direct intervention by the Prime Minister will bring Liam and Mia Terabici home, but he refuses to act. When will the Prime Minister call the President of Lebanon and demand the return of Liam and Mia Terabici?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much. Our thoughts do go out to the family at the centre of an abduction of Canadian children to Lebanon. Canadian consular officials are in direct contact with the family and are providing consular assistance. I have spoken personally with the family. Due to the provisions of the Privacy Act, I'm very sorry not to be able to disclose any further information.
Bravo. Député de Mirabel.
The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. By refusing to hear the case for former Avios workers, the Supreme Court confirmed what we've been repeating for years. The government caused the mess. It's the government that must fix it. This is a more political than legal matter. The Minister of Social Development has said that his thoughts are with the former workers from Avios. That's not worth anything. What they need are actions to help them. When will the government take action to forgive their odious debt? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members are all aware of the difficulties facing these workers for far too long. I have looked at the decision in the Supreme Court, and it would be unacceptable to comment on it. I want to reassure, however, all workers that they will be treated fairly by the Canada Revenue Agency. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, to show that he wasn't heartless, the Minister of Social Development pretended to be quite unfamiliar with the Avios file. Seriously. We wrote to him several times. Former workers from Avios wrote to him, he even met with them. And I can't even count the number of times we've questioned him about it here. $20 billion for the oil companies. Compared to that, $4 million for Avios is pocket change. Is he going to do the right thing and forgive the debt? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, members in this House were all elected to represent their fellow citizens. We are all listening to their needs. We are saddened by the difficulties they are facing. We are here to serve them. As I said yesterday, comes under from the legal field. All I can add today is that the minister responsible for the Canada Revenue Agency will work hard with all workers facing difficulties so they are treated fairly and with respect and dignity. The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Pontigny. Each year, Mr. Speaker, each year, farmers are concerned because they can't hire temporary foreign workers in time for the harvest season because of delays caused by Ottawa. And clearly, the government hasn't done anything to resolve the problem, because this year, processing delays from Quebec more than doubled. So what will the minister do today so that in the summer our farmers can not only recruit workers, but that the workers arrive before the crops rot in the fields?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, a government that's helped create 800,000 jobs in this across the country, 190,000 jobs in Quebec alone. That has put pressure on the workforce in Quebec, and we're working with the government of Quebec. The processing, we've put additional resources. After having experienced the conservative cutbacks over the last number of years, we've reinvested in those that are able to process, enter data, and we hope that we're able to support those farmers that need those workers.
Member for Nunavut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's for the Minister of Indigenous Services. $700 million missing. That's what was identified by a media analysis of this government, of the spending of your government's infrastructure program. And that reporting gap was directly attributed to an ongoing failure by your department and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs to report details of their spending. Nunavut has a huge infrastructure gap, particularly social infrastructure. So I have to ask, where is this missing $700 million and why hasn't it been invested in these desperately needed projects? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I want to remind the honourable members to place their questions through the Speaker, not to the Speaker, just to facilitate things. The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
And I thank the honourable member from Nunavut for that question. We are making significant investments in Nunavut in conjunction with our Indigenous partners. For instance, we've invested some $27.5 million over 5 years to eliminate tuberculosis by 2030. We're working with our partners and have invested $189 billion over 10 years in a Nunavut wellness agreement, as well as $8.4 million this year alone for mental health support for Inuit. But we understand, too, that significant investments require accountability, and I will continue to work with the honourable member and with local partners to make sure that we have that accountability for his constituents and for the people of Nunavut. Thank you.
I believe that the member for Mirabel has a point of order. Yes, Mr. Speaker. I think I have the unanimous consent of the House to table the correspondence between my office and the minister. I'm sure I have unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker. Does the honourable member have unanimous consent from the House to move the motion?
No, je m'excuse.
No, I'm sorry, but I don't believe there's unanimous consent.
Unanimité. L'honorable.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. I think you'll find unanimous consent to table the following table: election platform. Does he have the unanimous consent? No, he does not.
And has a point of order.
Erred in not repeating his motion in English. So the motion was to table the Liberal platform showing a balanced budget in the year 2019. I think you'll find unanimous consent to table that in the House of Commons.
Order, and we do have translators who take care of that, but thank you for pointing that out. So, in case any of you are wondering, question period is now over. I know you're all disappointed. Okay, tabling of documents. Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees. Introduction of private members' bills.
First reading of Senate public bills. Motions. Petitions. The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two petitions to table today that were signed mainly by people from my riding. The first petition I'm tabling deals with the plastic pollution strategy. The petitioners, because plastic is in our oceans, lakes, and rivers and other waterways, that threaten ecosystems, and because plastic penetrates the water and fauna through various means, and because of industrial waste, are calling on the government to draft a plastic pollution strategy and to work with provinces, Indigenous communities, municipalities to have a strategy. The second petition that I'm tabling is this. It's on local food. Canadians, when they buy local food, are supporting local farmers and the local economy. Local food reduces the cost of transportation and greenhouse gas emissions, so it's beneficial to the environment. And it also means that people can have access to fresh and nutritious food. So the petitioners are calling on the Government of Canada to convene a conference to elaborate a national strategy, and they're also calling on the government to have a local food procurement strategy for our government institutions throughout the country.
For Edmonton Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise today and the first time in this beautiful chamber to present a petition on behalf of the Nicaraguan Canadians from across Canada, including many of whom they live in my riding of Edmonton Manning. The Nicaraguan community is very concerned with the grave and persistent human rights abuses occurring in their home country under the Ortega regime. The signatories are calling on the Government of Canada to follow the example set by the United States and take concrete steps against Ortega regime officials who are implicated in severe human rights violations and corruption by applying sanctions through the Magnitsky Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the community looks forward to the government response on this vitally important petition. Thank you.
Well done.
The honourable member for Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a petition here signed by many people from Toronto in particular, concerned about the use of nuclear weapons and about the signing of the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I am presenting, I would like to thank the advocacy of Michael Nevin, who went out and collected all of these signatures.
Petitions, the honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Speaker, I'm tabling two petitions today. First petition I would like to table is on behalf of coastal British Columbians who are very happy to see this House unanimously pass my motion M151 to call on the Government of Canada for a national strategy to combat plastic pollution. With a garbage truck of plastic entering our waterways every minute, they're calling on the government to immediately act on the M151, the motion to combat plastic pollution, and develop a national strategy as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker, to mitigate and eliminate the amount of plastic that's entering our ecosystem. The second petition I'd like to table is calling on the government for a national framework for action to promote eye health and vision care. The number of Canadians with vision loss is expected to double in the next 20 years, and the emerging crisis in eye health and vision care affects all segments of the Canadian population, with Canada's most vulnerable populations, children, seniors, and Indigenous peoples at particular risk, and just 1% of the total expenditures on vision loss is invested in post-vision loss rehabilitation therapy.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very honored to rise in the House today to table a petition that has garnered overwhelming support from people across Canada. On January 18th, e-petition 1833 closed after receiving 18,200 signatures. It was initiated by Devon Hargreaves, co-president of the Y Queer Ale Society for Change in Lethbridge, and it calls upon the federal government to do more to protect minors in Canada from the harmful practice of conversion therapy. We've seen examples of municipal and provincial leadership. The petitioners are now asking the federal government to provide federal leadership. As a proud LGBTQ member of Parliament, I am honored to table this petition on behalf of the thousands of Canadians standing up for human rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise in the House today to present two petitions. The first is an e-petition, E7113, 774. And this petition relates to a very specific situation in a specific locality. It's the ongoing issue of prison farms in Canada. A number of them were closed down in the previous government, and efforts to reopen are the subject of these petitioners' concerns. The prison program is being used to advance in their petition declaration commercial interests. Milk from the prison program will be sent to a multinational, processed and shipped to China. The petitioners are asking for the government to overturn the decision to establish this prison dairy operation, establish prison farms that support local food, and prevent the use of animals in rehabilitation programs. The second petition, Mr. Speaker, from many residents of Saanich Gulf Islands relates to the issue of establishing marine protected areas. They note that there is a tremendous number of conflicting jurisdictions within the federal government around the issue of creating marine protected areas, so they call for the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans to work with colleagues and simplify the process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Présentation de pétitions.
Presenting petitions.
Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
And the orders of the day.
Amendement du gouvernement, projet de loi amendant du gouvernement commune, resuming consideration of motions respecting Senate amendments to Bill C-64, the Wrecked, Abandoned, or Hazardous Vessels Act.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi, or I should say resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi has 11 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So previously, I was saying that it was a real shame that in committee, the Liberals turned down nearly all of my colleague Sheila Malcolmson's proposed amendments. She had worked on this bill and had been basing her amendments on consultations with dozens of coastal communities and chambers of commerce who had proposed a number of really very useful solutions. Solutions to deal with this issue of abandoned vessels. So these amendments would have improved the bill. The Minister of Transport didn't think it was a good idea to incorporate those amendments into his bill. So we were really having all of these amendments rejected, even though there was very broad support for them all across the country. There were communities represented by Liberal members who had participated in consultations and made these amendments. And I think that it really contributes to a sense of cynicism when amendments like this are rejected. And then, of course, from a financial perspective, the bill is really hindered in 2017, 2018. The government initiative to get rid of these vessels only led to having 21 vessels actually dealt with, even though there are thousands of them all across Canada. Only 21 were actually dealt with. So that initiative didn't work at all. Now, this is a step in the right direction, but there are a number of shortcomings, and the Liberals don't seem to be open to improving the bill. Now, I could go through the various amendments that were proposed by my colleague Sheila Malcolmson. She had proposed having a program inspired by the auto refund program that had worked well in several provinces, but that was rejected by the Liberals. But without that type of program, you can't deal with this problem of thousands of abandoned vessels. A number of coastal communities will not be able to get rid of the vessels that have been languishing there for years.
Another amendment involved costs to cover the cost of getting rid of these vessels, and it was based on a proposal in Washington State that had allowed them to spare the taxpayers from a huge financial burden associated with this work. Another amendment was officializing the role of the Coast Guard as a one-ticket window so that there would be less corporate redundancy. Now, how many times were we told, oh, sorry, the Coast Guard is responsible for the catch and spirit? Or, well, now it's actually Transport Canada who's responsible for this. Oh, sorry, actually, now that we've got a working group on this, it's going to be Environment Canada who's going to deal with the problem. So for 7 years, nobody knew whom to turn to. Nobody knew what to do because the departments couldn't agree amongst themselves. Even the ministers who answered questions in the House of Commons changed. One day it was the Coast Guard, one day it was the Minister for the Environment. It would change from week to week. So if we could just decide that there was one person responsible for this, it would be a lot easier for everyone, including for the government. But once again, this sensible solution was rejected. Now, increasing accountability for the registry, that was also rejected. We also wanted to have a database for permits that would be improved and updated because it's very outdated. It would be very useful for boat owners in a number of cases. Mr. Andrew Kendrick testified before the committee in 2018, and he suggested that. And a document from Transport Canada from 2018 even said that this was not part of the bill, but should be. So why is it not being added if it would help identify boats? Another amendment that was rejected was to get the minister to be obliged to take charge of this bill and to be responsible for the boats. Now, the bill just says that there's discretion here, so the minister can decide to take care of the boats or not. So what's the point of the bill if you just leave it up to the minister's discretion? Another rejected amendment had to do with basing ourselves on the Washington model to change the period to 90 days. Now, it took 7 years before they could finally get rid of the catch and spirit. In fact, it took 5 years before the federal government agreed to work on the boat, to work on the situation. There was a Mexican company that the boat had been sold to, and so the whole situation was a little bit ambiguous. That Mexican company went bankrupt, and so the government had no choice but to take care of the bill that was in a drinking water reservoir, and every spring, during the spring thaw, there was a risk of a spill in Lac Saint-Louis. So that obviously was way too long, and even the proposal of 90 days was rejected. So once again, we're going to be dealing with administrative delays, and it could be a very long time before the federal government actually gets to work to deal with an abandoned vessel. Another amendment that was rejected had to do with increasing transparency. I kind of talked about that before. And evaluating legislative problems every 5 years. So 5-year review seems very normal to me. Normally, if you have a new bill, you want to review it to see if there's anything that can be improved. But nope, they're just saying, oh, this bill is perfect as it is, and we'll never have to look at it again. Another amendment that was rejected was preventing goods seized by the Crown to become abandoned vessels. And, I could continue here. It just doesn't make any sense, Mr. Speaker. I'm going through these amendments here that were all rejected. These are measures that were not proposed by a single person. These are the result of consultations with municipalities, with business owners, because of course this has an impact on tourism, the fishing industry. It affects people who live along the coast and people who need clean drinking water. I wanted to conclude my argument here by providing some numbers from municipalities and jurisdictions that have actually put in place some of the measures that were rejected here, but that they found to be effective. In Bowen Island, one of the islands, which is a member of the Island Trust, invested a lot of money since 2014 to withdraw more than 4 tons of material from abandoned vessels. In Washington State, between 2003 and 2017, they were able to deal with thousands of abandoned vessels. We could have taken inspiration from their model, but the Liberals didn't want to. There was also the proposal about the registry, which was once again rejected by the Liberals. Why? We don't have any idea. Perhaps it just made too much sense for them. Now, I could keep going on indefinitely, Mr. Speaker. There are many examples from France, from Finland, from Florida, California, Oregon. There are a lot of people who have put in place good solutions. We did research, we looked at the work of experts and other jurisdictions to make these amendments, and they were all rejected out of hand without any analysis and without any real counter-argument. The Liberals simply rejected them. So we will continue to support this bill because, of course, there was nothing there before, and this is at least a step in the right direction. But it would have been better if the Liberals had incorporated some of the amendments brought forward by my colleague, the former member for Nanaimo Ladysmith, who is no longer here in the House, but who had been preceded by Jean Crowder, another NDP member, who had studied the issue all across the country. So I don't think the Liberals should really be boasting about this, because the budget that they've actually allocated to this is only a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed. We're talking about $1.25 million, and the Catch and Spirit itself cost over $24 million to taxpayers. So I think that they need to take a second look at this. Questions and comments?
It's the honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suspect, if we want to look at the glass in the sense of being half full, that there's many measures within the legislation that I believe address a very serious issue that has been there for many years. The abandonment of watercrafts has been a huge concern, and we have a department that has done a great deal of work in terms of consultations, ultimately bringing the legislation. And yes, the bill did go to committee, and we have seen, whether it's this legislation or other legislation, the government being very responsible in terms of looking at, taking into consideration amendments. In fact, this government has had a policy of accepting amendments where, in fact, it can be determined that it is better for the legislation. So the question that I have for the member is that as much as she might have some issues with respect to not seeing enough amendments being passed, would she not agree that at the very least what it does do is it does move the area of dealing with the issue of abandonment forward, maybe not to her satisfaction, personal satisfaction, but at least that we are moving in the right direction.
The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm really kind of surprised by the member's comments again. He's boasting about this, but I just listed all of the aspects, all of the amendments that were proposed in committee that were rejected out of hand. There were 12 out of 13 amendments that were rejected. And there were 50 coastal communities that were consulted. in order to create these amendments. The Chamber of Commerce also participated in developing the bill and proposals that were rejected before Bill C-352 was even debated. So the Liberals say that they're open, that they are open to all of these amendments, but I could name all kinds of bills where no amendments were adopted in committee because the Liberals are totally closed off to ideas from opposition parties. And the Green Party leader could say the same thing. There are dozens of amendments that she put forward that were simply rejected out of hand without any debate, and it just doesn't make sense. Now, when I say that we don't have a receiver for these vessels, we talked about the Catherine Spirit for so long, and whether it was the Conservatives or the Liberals, it was always the same thing. We were sent from one department to another, from one person to another, without ever being able to find the person who was actually responsible for this. So we're calling for a single person who would be responsible, but the Liberals have said no. Now, the Mexican company that to whom the Catherine Spirit was sold, and it was, of course, supposed to be dismantled. When that company, or rather when the boat was sold to the Mexican company, there was no registration number. And so it was extremely difficult to identify the company, to know where it was, what that company was doing in the situation. It took months before we could even get our phone calls returned from them. If we had a registration system, it would be so much easier in terms of dealing with these administrative procedures. Now, in the end, the company went bankrupt, so it was just really, really difficult to deal with. And we don't want the tax burden here to fall on taxpayers, so the company needs to be able to be identified and to pay their share. But again, that was not deemed necessary by the Liberals. They rejected the amendments. And in the end, the Catherine Spirit cost $24 million to the citizens of Canada because the Conservatives and Liberals both dragged their feet on this file.
Questions and comments. The
Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my colleague, the Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Now, I also brought forward amendments in committee when this bill, C-64, was being studied. But I am perhaps more satisfied with C-64 now than some other members of the NDP. I'm not sure why. Perhaps it's because of my role as a representative of the Gulf Islands. I have to say that in my area we have a serious problem with derelict and abandoned vessels. We also have a problem with homeless people who have chosen to live in some of these boats. It's extremely dangerous, and it's really a very threatening situation. So that is why I am just looking forward to the moment when this bill will come into force. And when we will actually have more money to take action against the dangers that these boats in BC pose. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, there are positive aspects to this bill, and we will be supporting it. That's what we've said from the very beginning at the NDP. We think it's a step in the right direction, of course. But when she says there will be funding, yes, there will be $1.25 million for 5 years. But what I'm saying is that's a drop in the bucket, because the Catherine Spirit alone, the cost to dismantle it was $24 million. So do the math on that. There's a lack of money there. If there are thousands of abandoned vessels, including maybe hundreds in British Columbia, how can such a ridiculously small budget cover the cost of dismantling those boats safely? How can we dismantle them and take them out of the water safely? So, yes, there are measures here, and yes, there are boats that can be dismantled, but there have only been 21 boats dismantled since 2017. Now, that's better than zero, but I think this bill lacks ambition, and I think there's a lack of goodwill from the Liberals and a lack of willingness to really make this bill effective.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Durham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it's quite fitting that my final speech of the week in the first week in the new chamber of West Block, moving out of the building with the Peace Tower and the Memorial Chamber honoring those who gave the ultimate sacrifice to Canada, it's fitting that I'm going to speak this end of this first week on something that is very important to military families, veterans, and Canadians, and that's preserving the legacy of those who died in the service of Canada, Mr. Speaker. So on Bill C-64, a bill that deals with wrecked and abandoned and hazardous vessels, there's a lot in there, Mr. Speaker, and at times I think, abandoned hazardous vessels that appear listless and things like that, it sounds to me like a description of the Liberal cabinet, Mr. Speaker, but this is actually a bill dealing with an important maritime safety piece. But it's an example of where the Senate and the House of Commons, but most importantly Canadians, have worked to make sure that Bill C-64 actually preserves something far greater than the maritime regulations for safety with abandoned vessels, because it's going to preserve the remains of those who died on the sea in service of our country, Mr. Speaker. So as a veteran, as someone who speaks regularly in the old chamber and now in this one on these issues, I'm honored to say a few words and to thank the Canadians who've helped with the Senate and with the House to make this legislation better, to preserve the legacy that we owe to our fallen, Mr. Speaker. This bill, as amended by the Senate, will allow the government to make regulations to protect, preserve Canada's war graves, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the Canadians, the patriotic Canadians who brought this to committee, brought this to the Senate, and pushed these amendments with collaboration of many members on both sides of this chamber. Project Naval Distinction was behind this effort, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank their leaders. Most importantly, Captain Retired Paul Bender, a World War II veteran, Mr. Speaker, who's been fighting passionately on this issue to protect the final resting place of our servicemen and women for many years, and it's going to be achieved by this legislation. Alongside him, Vice Admiral Retired Denis Rouleau, Mr. Speaker. Alongside him, the Honourable Ian Holloway, a naval veteran himself, the Dean of Law at the University of Calgary, and then a good friend of mine, Richard Blackwolf, Mr. Speaker, the head of the Canadian Aboriginal Veterans and Serving Members Association. These volunteers and passionate Canadians have been pushing for this. I also want to add a friend and former staff member of mine, a naval lieutenant in the reserves and at law school now, Patrick White, Mr. Speaker, who worked for me when I was parliamentary secretary and when I was Minister of Veterans Affairs. He was one of the serving or veteran members of my office. I was so proud that as a law student, working alongside Captain Bender, he appeared before committee to make sure that we preserve this important testament to the people that gave their lives serving Canada. This is to preserve the final resting space of our merchant marine and warships, Mr. Speaker, where Canadians perished. Sailors, merchant mariners, in the longest single battle of the Second World War in particular. While there will be war graves from before that, many of the vessels that will get protection by regulations from this legislation are from the Battle of the Atlantic, which between 1939 and 1945 achieved victory in that conflict, Mr. Speaker. The single longest battle of the Second World War. So this legislation will recognize and define the war graves of these shipwreck sites, provide regulations around their preservation, and even attach penalties for the violations of these sacred areas, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the amazing veterans and volunteer Canadians, passionate patriots who pushed to make this happen. The UK has had a similar legislation for about 20 years, the Protection of Military Remains Act, Mr. Speaker. And I want to also thank our allies in France, who the government in France has had legislation preserving their shipwrecks, and Captain Bender and the volunteers of Project Naval Distinction have actually worked with the French to protect HMCS Athabaskan and HMCS Guysborough, which lie in French territorial waters, Mr. Speaker. So these volunteers have been working not just to make sure our legislation is better, they've been working with our allies. So merci beaucoup de notre allié.
So thank you very much to our French allies, Mr. Speaker, for that.
How profound the Battle of the Atlantic was, Mr. Speaker. 72 merchant marine vessels lost, supplying the war effort, Mr. Speaker. Over 1,600 lives. In fact, I was proud. In fact, it was a conservative MP, Elsie Wayne, that fought for years to make sure that our merchant marine veterans got better and appropriate recognition. Because their loss and casualty rate, Mr. Speaker, 1 in 7 was a casualty in the Second World War. So I want to thank those veterans and their families and let them know that we'll preserve those wrecks, Mr. Speaker. The Royal Canadian Navy lost 26 warships and 7 torpedo boats, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of lives, over 2,000 lives in the Battle of the Atlantic from the Royal Canadian Navy, Mr. Speaker. 752 from the Royal Canadian Air Force, flying in conjunction with the anti-submarine warfare type missions to protect the convoys. And as a proud naval air veteran in this House, I'm proud of the Navy and Air Force's tradition of working on this, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to have served on the HMCS St. John's, Mr. Speaker, part of the air debt, where we continued that legacy of protecting the ships, protecting lives at sea from the subsurface threat. Incredible collaboration between the Merchant Marine, the Royal Canadian Navy, and the Royal Canadian Air Force and our allies to make sure the war effort was run. I'd also add that civilians can be recognized through this, Mr. Speaker, as well, because 136 lives were lost on SS Caribou, a ferry that was sunk in transit between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. Speaker. You seem to be very aware of that. This is part of Canada's remarkable contribution to the Battle of the Atlantic and to global peace and security. We should be proud of it, but we should fight to preserve it, Mr. Speaker, and that is what this bill does. Sometimes I found, talking about our history, our military history about veterans, we sometimes lose sight of the fact when we hear numbers like 2,000 in the Navy, 752 in the Air Force, 1,600 plus in the Merchant Marines. Those aren't numbers, Mr. Speaker. Each one is a family that was gripped by the loss of their son or daughter, Mr. Speaker. And we can't lose sight of that. So I'm going to invite parliamentarians to think of that as we pass this, as we support it with these amendments, Mr. Speaker. We're thankful for all sides and those Project Naval Distinction for making it happen. But in Westboro, there's a bench dedicated to Lieutenant Navy Leslie Ward, who died aboard HMCS Athabaskan on April 29, 1944. Now, lives lost at sea, Mr. Speaker, are recognized in the Naval Monument in Point Pleasant Park in Halifax. I've been there, many members have been there. You hear the bell toll for each ship lost, and you're there, and you're thinking how many rings of the bell there are, Mr. Speaker. But the names aren't there because we count them in ships. So years ago, decades ago, Lieutenant Ward was honored at the Point Pleasant Monument, Mr. Speaker. But fortunately, naval veterans and his family also honored him in Westboro on Wellington, Mr. Speaker. Just down the road. You can go have a seat on the bench in his honor and contemplate the thousands of Canadians who died serving us on the oceans. So to end my remarks on a Friday and to end my remarks with respect to those lives lost, I'm going to end with a few words selected from the naval prayer, Mr. Speaker. Preserve us from the dangers of the sea and from the violence of the enemy, that we may be a safeguard unto our most gracious sovereign and her dominion, that the inhabitants of the Commonwealth may be in peace and quietness to serve thee, and that we may return safely to enjoy the blessings of the land. Mr. Speaker, to those who did not return to enjoy the blessings of the land, this bill and its amendments, thanks to many Canadians, will preserve and protect their final resting place, lest we forget.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I want to thank my honourable friend from Durham. I do believe this bill should be passed. The protection of war graves below the waterline is certainly something that has been attended to by the other place. But the imperative to pass this legislation, of course, is the current threat to life and limb that exists particularly along the west coast of British Columbia. It's obviously not an issue at that level that touches on the member's riding, but I do want to assure him that this bill is urgently needed, that there is a current threat along the coast of British Columbia. I think I'll have an opportunity in a moment to explain what it is more fully, but I really do welcome this legislation, and I'm pleased to know that members of his party will be voting for passage.
The honourable member for Durham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's nice to see you there, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my friend from Saanich Gulf Islands for her comment. Certainly I agree. This is a very serious issue that we've heard for many years in a variety of forms, particularly from our Pacific coast in British Columbia. And I was fortunate in the fact that there seems to be general agreement in this House on the pith of the legislation itself. I wanted to take the opportunity to not just highlight the importance of the remembrance and those who have served Canada. This is a great example where passionate advocates like Captain Bender, who I think is in his 80s, Mr. Speaker, Canadians can influence this place because we are their representatives. And this is a process with C-64, where their passion has helped make this legislation better. So I dedicated my remarks today really to showcase what they've done alongside the Senate and members of this place to make sure we amend this to fix the real public policy challenge we are seeing on the West Coast, but also to show that passionate Canadians can make their changes to preserve our history.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend from Durham for his speech and for his advocacy for protecting our military sea graves. And I'd like, through you, Mr. Speaker, if he would comment a little bit more. We have so many historical events that happened in our country during World War II, whether it was on the East Coast or whether on the West Coast. Lost sailors, lost airmen, the Alaska Highway route, the northern route where we supplied military aircraft from the United States to Alaska, then on to Russia during the war. We have so many of these sites, and so many are forgotten. And I was wondering if he could maybe elaborate a little bit more, through you, Mr. Speaker, about the need for us to now start to recognize these historical significant spots in Canada where things happened, tragedies happened during World War II, or in either of our east or west coasts, or in the Arctic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Durham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm really happy my friend from Yellowhead asked that question. He knows service well, Mr. Speaker, from his decades of service in uniform to our country, and we appreciate his service now in Parliament after giving a lifetime of service. Hear, hear. He's right. In fact, he and several of us were just talking about how special and sacred Beechwood National Cemetery here is in Ottawa, and how few Canadians actually know we have a national military cemetery here in our nation's capital. Certainly it's not as well known as the hallowed grounds at Arlington that I've had the privilege to lay a wreath at, Mr. Speaker, but Canadians should explore and know these places. I met with the passionate people, including retired General Bino of the Juno Beach Foundation, Mr. Speaker. They've now lost some private sector funding. This was something to preserve the landing place where thousands of lives in the Normandy operation were lost, starting at Juno, Mr. Speaker. They're now looking for funding. So I hope the new Minister of Veterans Affairs can work with them, because here was another example of passionate Canadians that actually opened the visitor center and museum in France on their own with really no help. Now there's a little operating funds, but I hope the government comes forward with a plan to actually preserve that, like they did with Vimy, that we started and they opened. They can do this with Juno, Mr. Speaker, because my friend is right. McRae said over a century ago, Mr. Speaker, from failing hands, we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. We're now losing so many World War II veterans, Mr. Speaker. It's up to us to preserve that legacy. We can hold the torch high, not in combat, Mr. Speaker, but in recognizing their sacrifice, preserving their final resting places, and educating future Canadians who enjoy the country they provided us.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. Resuming debate. Reprise du débat, the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I couldn't be more pleased but to take the floor. I think I may be the last speaker at this stage of the progress of this bill and reviewing now the amendments sent to us by the Senate and approving this bill to go back to the Senate. I wanted to share with members who don't experience what it means to have a problem of derelict and dilapidated boats what it means. It might sound to someone who doesn't live on a coastline as though it's a rather small issue, as though it's something that one could leave waiting a while. After all, the boats are derelict and dilapidated and abandoned. Having lived on the East Coast for so long, certainly around Cape Breton Island, we didn't have a problem of derelict and dilapidated boats because they were generally smashed to bits through the winter storms and you didn't see them the following year. But on the more tranquil inland waters of the Salish Sea, around the southern Gulf Islands and up into the north coast and the areas, not the north coast, but the northern areas of our Gulf Islands up at Gabriola and Hornby and the islands stretching up into the coastal the coastal eastern coast of Vancouver Island. We have a lot of problems with derelict boats, stretching all the way down, as previous speakers have mentioned, to Bowen Island. Many areas of British Columbia have such peaceful inland waters and a lack of winter storms, so that boats that have been abandoned, which owners do far too frequently, at no cost and no risk to themselves, they just abandon a vessel. Now, that has caused, of course, threats to navigation, hazards in the waters. But more recently, we have a quite profound problem, and that is that the housing shortage in southern Vancouver Island is so acute, and on the lower mainland, that homeless people take up residence in abandoned vessels. Now try to imagine the multiple threats and hazards that involves. And it's growing at an epidemic rate. On January 21st, with local residents, I took a tour of Sayham Harbor, where multiple vessels, some of them rafted together to form something of a community of vessels together, are housing people. Some people are paying rent to the owners for substandard living conditions. Of course, no proper heat. Living on a vessel in open waters in the winter is not a safe living condition. But it's particularly acute on Salt Spring Island, where on Burgoyne Bay and Ganges, these have become magnets for crime. They're no longer safe areas. It's a significant problem, and that's compounded by not having adequate RCMP attending to the southern Gulf Islands. There's just not enough RCMP officers to help where crime is increasing in areas like Pender Island and like Salt Spring Island, which are idyllic places. So I bring to you that this is really a crisis. We need to find homes for these people who are taking refuge in inadequate habitation on abandoned vessels. We need to deal with abandoned vessels rapidly. We have another problem that's worsened this situation, and that's in a bill that's currently before the Senate, and I'm going to seek amendments there to deal with this. And this is Bill C-69, which amends our Navigable Waters Protection Act, now the Navigable Waters Act. Under the previous government of Stephen Harper, they made it much easier to put buoys out and ignore them. Now, they weren't thinking that they were making it easier to put buoys out. They just exempted minor works. This needs to be dealt with now because what's happened is placing buoys in the water without proper review is easier because we treat them as a minor work and they're therefore exempted. So that's another matter to return to. I just want to let this House know that multiple layers of government are struggling with this problem and waiting with bated breath for Transport Canada to have the additional resources, the additional focus. The current situation involves local governments, municipalities, the Islands Trust, the Capital Regional District for the Victoria area, where they have an abandoned vessel program and they get stuck with the costs, and we need to find federal funding to help the CRD with the costs they experience. We also have the Coast Guard involved, the RCMP involved, and primarily Transport Canada that is gearing up, and I have to say the civil servants working on this in our local area are terrific, as well as numerous local residents for whom this bill can't come soon enough. I am extremely grateful to the local residents who organized that meeting January 21st that brought mayors together, CRD officials, island trusts, RCMP, Transport Canada. This has been a nightmare of an issue, and we know that funding is waiting. It won't be enough, but it's a good start. So I'd just like to thank this House for doing everything possible to, as expeditiously as possible, get this legislation passed and get those derelict boats out of our waters and find housing for people who are currently taking shelter in abandoned vessels. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions and comments? Is the House ready for the question? The question is as follows. Mr. Garneau, seconded by Mr. Champagne, moved that the amendments made by the Senate to Bill C-64, an act respecting wrecks, abandoned, dilapidated, and hazardous vessels and salvage operations, be now read a second time and concurred in. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Carried. Orders of the day.
Oh, hold on. We have to see the clock. See, Monsieur Lamoureux, recognize the government parliamentary secretary.
Point of order, recognized by the. I see that the Deputy House Leader is standing on a point of order.
Yes, on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, I suspect if you were to canvass the House, you would find unanimous consent to call it 1:30 at this time, so we could begin private members' hour.
The honourable member have unanimous consent. So be it. Accordingly, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
Orders of the day. Private members' business, affaires émanant des députés, resuming consideration of S-203, Bill S-203, ending the Captivity of Whales and Dolphins Act, standing in the name of Miss May, Saanich Gulf Islands.
Now that he's back in his place, debate. The honourable member for It happens to all of us, yes. Caribou, Prince George, yes.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise and speak to Bill S-203, an act to amend the Criminal Code and other acts, ending the captivity of whales and dolphins. This bill amends the Criminal Code to create offences respecting cetaceans in captivity. It also amends the Fisheries Act to prohibit the taking of cetacean into captivity in the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulation of International Interprovincial Trade Act, to require a permit for the import of cetacean into Canada and the export of cetaceans into Canada. Mr. Speaker, there are 2 facilities in Canada that have cetaceans in captivity. Essentially what this bill will do, in my comments, will focus primarily on the one in my beautiful province of British Columbia, which is the Vancouver Aquarium. Essentially what this bill will do is shut down the important research work done by professionals at the Vancouver Aquarium. Now, I've listened to my colleagues' passionate speeches on this important bill, and I've listened to the leader of the Green Party, and while I know that her intentions are good, I'm afraid her concerns are perhaps misstated. Mr. Speaker, the Vancouver Aquarium is an established not-for-profit marine science center that has contributed to groundbreaking conservation research for over 6 decades. Research at the Vancouver Aquarium is conducted by world-class scientists, biologists, veterinarians, animal care technicians, and scholars. For over 60 years, scientists at the aquarium have delivered insights into a natural world. Situated on the shoreline of Stanley Park in British Columbia, the aquarium is ideally positioned to conduct research that provides real-world relevance. The knowledge acquired through these initiatives contributes to improved animal care, increased understanding of the biology of diverse species, and effective conservation planning. Mr. Speaker, I have to also admit that I've spent a couple nights in the Vancouver Aquarium. You see, another part of what the Vancouver Aquarium does is it educates that next generation coming up through our school systems. Mr. Speaker, I will admit, I'll share a secret, that I'm absolutely terrified of snakes. So camping out in the middle of the night with an anaconda, probably a 30-foot anaconda, in a tank a mere 12 feet away is a little bit concerning for myself. But my son and my daughter, who both took part in those overnight trips to the Vancouver Aquarium, came away both understanding more about what we can do to help our wild animals and our beaches and our oceans than they could reading a textbook any day. Vancouver Aquarium researchers explore a wide range of topics, including veterinary sciences, nutrition, life history, and habitat needs. Oceanwise, a not-for-profit organization whose vision in the world is a world in which oceans are healthy, flourishing, and they conduct their research at the Vancouver Aquarium. The Vancouver Aquarium leads the only marine mammal rescue center in Canada with a skilled team able to rescue stranded whales and dolphins. The aquarium has been rescuing and rehabilitating whales and dolphins along BC's coast for over 50 years, with the intention to release healthy and recovered animals back to their natural habitat. The only cetacean currently in professional care at the aquarium is a rescued Pacific white-sided dolphin that had been deemed non-releasable by government authorities due to her inability to survive alone in the wild. Those that stay in care, they're there because they must, for their survival, are cared for at the highest standards, per the Canadian Council of Animal Care guidelines. They also, in turn, contribute immensely to scientific research as they accord to scientists the opportunity to study their social interaction, their interaction with underwater acoustics, and their communication with each other. It is in accredited aquariums that we have learned about cetacean physiology, their mechanisms, and interactions that operate within a living system. Team members at the Vancouver Aquarium have learned about their hearing and acoustic ability. They've learned much about their diet and energetic requirements, lung mechanics, and pulmonary function. They have tested field equipment such as hydrophones, mark recapture bands, and non-invasive attachments for satellite tags and cameras. Research with animals at Vancouver Aquarium often carries on into the field. In the St. Lawrence estuary, their scientists are measuring the acoustic communication of beluga whales to learn how we can mitigate the impact of underwater noise on that endangered population. Their scientists are studying the endangered killer whales using images taken from a drone to measure and assess changes in the whale's length and girth and to determine if they're not getting enough fish to eat. All of that study starts at the Vancouver Aquarium. Accredited aquariums and zoos have a unique expertise that is needed to save species that are at risk. This is not the time to be phasing out facilities and expertise that can help wildlife in an unknown future. We have only begun to scratch the surface of what we can do with species survival programs and reintroduction projects for species at risk. Zoos and aquariums offer critical elements in these efforts that, frankly, other stakeholders simply cannot. Around the world, accredited facilities have helped save species like the black-footed ferret, the California condor, and at the Vancouver Aquarium, the Panamanian golden frog. Vancouver's aquarium marine biologists, veterinarians, and scientists contribute to research on killer whales, narwhals, beluga whales, harbor porpoises, etc. But because they have necessary elements, veterinarians, biologists, husbandry experts, and facilities are always trained and always ready. Programs like these take time to develop, and expertise is gained through experience. The Marine Mammal Rescue Centre is the only hospital of its kind in Canada, and now rescues, rehabilitates, and releases more than 150 or more marine animals a year. These are wild animals that are found stranded or severely injured, and they're rescued under government permits. Mr. Speaker, I know my colleague from the Green Party will not like what I have to say, and I accept that, but I'm not alone in my belief that the work of science is extremely important to the protection of species at risk. Just a few weeks ago, I received an email from Dr. Laura Graham, a professor at the University of Guelph. Her specialty is endocrinology and reproductive physiology of the wildlife species, including looking at the factors that can impact the welfare of wildlife species managed by humans, and using science to solve some of the challenges wildlife managers face as they work towards optimizing the welfare of animals in their care. And I'd like to read a direct quote from her correspondence. She said, "As an expert in endangered species physiology, I can tell you this, that this bill is short-sighted and will do irreparable harm to critical research on marine mammals listed under SARA, including the Salish orca. Over 90% of what we know about marine mammal biology is based on the research on individuals under human care. And while we need these captive animals to develop research techniques that can be applied to free-ranging animals." Mr. Speaker, Dr. Graham, along with her colleague Dr. Sam Wasser, used a non-invasive method of monitoring hormones in the Salish orcas and determined that they were losing their pregnancies due to a nutritional deficit. Dr. Graham wrote, "If this research hadn't been done, these orcas were managed according to the demands of animal activists, we would have instigated restrictions on how close tourist boats can get to them, and then watched with stupid looks on our faces as they slowly starved to death. And although there is a clause for research in Bill S-203, it is meaningless." Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that those in favor of this bill do have the best intentions at heart, but if they truly cared about the survival of the species, if they wanted to ensure the survival and not just pander to the demands of animal activists, they would look closely at this bill and come to the realization that science is important and we need to continue the life-saving research that groups like the Vancouver Aquarium and others and scientists provide. As I've said, there are provisions within Bill S-203 that will interfere with the good work and accomplishments we have talked about today. And as such, I do look forward to seeing this bill go to committee, but I will not be voting for it. Thank you.
Resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Bill S-203 would gradually end the captivity of whales and dolphins, whether it's Quebec or Vancouver. People are less accepting of the fact that belugas and killer whales are kept in captivity. The NDP supports this bill because it has the support of Canadians and researchers. Canada can do a lot more to protect vulnerable mammals and to end the inhumane treatment of these animals. A poll in 2018 showed that Canadians are twice as likely to think that it should be prohibited to keep animals in captivity than to allow it. Under Bill S-203, there would be a gradual end to captivity. Currently, captures are legal if they are authorized. The last one took place in 1992 at belugas near Churchill. Under the bill, it would be prohibited to import or export unless it's for the purposes of research or to ensure the well-being of animals. For example, moving an animal to a sanctuary. under the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulation of International and Interprovincial Trade Act. It also prohibits production under the criminal code. It prohibits cruelty, and there could be penalties of up to $200,000. Bill S-203 was considered by the Senate Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, and experts from around the world said that maintaining animals in captivity cannot be justified given what we know now about these cetaceans. They are marine mammals who are intelligent and sociable, sensitive to sound, and therefore they need to be able to move freely and dive deeply. I was surprised to learn how far a whale could go, up to 100 miles a day. And so when you look at the size of aquariums, you can understand why these animals feel captive. Studies have shown that it is cruel to keep these mammals in captivity. These are intelligent marine mammals who have social and acoustic needs. They need big spaces to dive and to swim. A killer whale lives in a space that is a fraction of the size of its natural space, and therefore they do not have enough space to swim in a straight line or to deep. And they're also forced to entertain tourists, and these whales can then become aggressive. When they're captive, they are prisoners, and they suffer from health problems. Their lifespan is less. There's a high infant mortality, and they suffer trauma due to transfers and separations within the population. So all the evidence shows that captivity facilities do not meet their social or biological needs. We now have much greater knowledge of these species, and therefore there's no longer any need to keep them captive for economic reasons. Under S-203, there would be time for facilities to transition. There would be places like Marineland or Vancouver Aquarium where animals have been living, and I hope that these mammals may be able to retire in a sanctuary. Now, Bill S-203 doesn't end capture for safety reasons, because at times there are whales that need to be saved. However, they should not be kept under the current captivity conditions. It has never been shown that there is any benefit for science, and captivity has very negative, harmful effects on marine animals. According to Jane Goodall, who was invited to the Senate committee last fall, she said this: the Vancouver Aquarium has reproduction rights on its facilities, as well as in SeaWorld, and that is not defensible. There's a high mortality rate, and when you're using these animals for entertainment, it has a traumatic effect on them. They have to be ended gradually, and cetaceans have to be treated as equals. This should not be a partisan issue. It's a moral issue supported by science. In December 2015, this bill became stuck because of dilatory motions on the part of the Conservatives, and it was my colleague from Port Moody, Coquitlam, along with other members, who publicly told the Senate to stop dragging its feet and send this bill to the House. We, the NDP, believe that the government should support ethical research on cetaceans. That is, research that is done in the natural environment. Scientists can then get a very realistic idea of the behavior of these cetaceans without imposing harm and pain on them. Cetaceans in captivity suffer, and that is not justifiable. There is a balanced way to do science. There will be exemptions for animals that are already in captivity, and it allows for a gradual transition for other facilities. So these facilities aren't being told to close from one day to the next. However, in the long term, it is the right thing to do, and we have to act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Resuming debate.
Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising today to speak to Bill S-203, an act to amend the Criminal Code and other acts ending the captivity of whales and dolphins. This bill would change 3 pieces of legislation: the Criminal Code, the Fisheries Act, and the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulation of International Interprovincial Trade Act. I'd like to begin, Mr. Speaker, by saying that I strongly support this bill, like many Canadians around the country. And I hope that the debate will continue in committee. We're learning more and more about whales and other cetaceans, and it has become clear that captivity is never, without exception, the right thing to do. Not only in Canada, the movement against captivity of whales has grown, and it continues to gain momentum around the world. My spouse and myself have seen whales in the St. Lawrence River, for example, in Tadoussac, and we were transformed by the experience. But it's not only in Tadoussac that we can see our whales.
It is, Mr. Speaker, that support for this law is not just strong for those in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, but there's also those in the West Coast who are in awe at the beauty of these creatures. Those that live in Vancouver, Victoria, Haida Gwaii, where on the coast are treated to incredible sights and sounds of the orcas as they play and as they hunt and share their majesty with us all. But it's not just coastal Canadians that are fueling this movement, Mr. Speaker. It's all Canadians, young and old, that have listened to the science, learned more about these incredible creatures, and know that they do not belong in swimming pools, no matter how large. This is indeed good news, Mr. Speaker, but that's not all the good news that I want to share with you. While the banning of whale captivity is not yet in legislation, the practice has been in place for years in Canada. Licenses for the capture of live cetaceans are only issued by the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard for scientific research or rehabilitation. And in the past 10 years, Mr. Speaker, only 1 license has been issued for the rehabilitation of a live-stranded Pseudo orca calf. Our government has also taken notice of the growing concern to ensure that cetaceans are not being captured for the sole purpose of being kept on public display, Mr. Speaker. And that is why last year our government introduced Bill C-68, which is awaiting committee consideration in the other place, and contains amendments that would prohibit the captivity of whales and allow the minister to put in place regulations to ban the import and export of these beautiful creatures. Today, there are only 2 facilities, Mr. Speaker, in all of Canada that house cetaceans: Marineland in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and the Vancouver Aquarium in British Columbia. Marineland is, as many of us know, a commercial facility with approximately 60 cetaceans. Most are belugas, with one being a killer whale. The Vancouver Aquarium is a not-for-profit facility and has 1 cetacean at its facility, a 30-year-old Pacific white-sided dolphin that has been rescued from the wild and has been deemed to be unfortunately unfit for release back into the wild, Mr. Speaker. Vancouver Aquarium works with Fisheries and Oceans Canada to rescue and rehabilitate marine mammals in distress. But even with all this, Mr. Speaker, we know that we must do more to ensure that cetaceans continue to be protected. And that is why we need to make it clear through legislation that indeed whales do not belong in captivity. While we're here today debating the need for whales to remain in the wild, I also want to highlight the need for us to ensure that their marine environment is also protected, Mr. Speaker. And over the past few years, in that regard, this government has made real investments to protect and conserve our marine environment. In 2016, the Prime Minister announced $1.5 billion for the Oceans Protections Plan, Mr. Speaker, which has since funded 55 coastal restoration projects and is helping to address threats to marine mammals from vessel noise and collisions, and to increase our on-scene environmental response capacity all across the country.
Further, Mr. Speaker, as part of 2018 budget, this government also announced $167.4 million for the Whales Initiative, which has further funded recovery plans for endangered species such as the southern resident killer whale, the beluga whale, and the North Atlantic right whale. It is clear, Mr. Speaker, that protecting marine mammals is an ongoing initiative, and today we are debating a piece of legislation that will help ensure that whales stay where they belong, in the wild.
However, Mr. Speaker, I've heard a number of concerns about our jurisdiction and about the mechanisms that would allow this bill to make significant changes to the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulation of International and Interprovincial Trade Act. In fact, as many of you know, many provinces also have animal protection laws in place. For example, Mr. Speaker, Ontario has banned the breeding and purchase of killer whales and has additional regulations to protect other animal species. Today's bill would also make changes related to animal welfare to the criminal code. I am looking forward to starting the debate in committee to learn more about the sharing of federal and provincial jurisdictions in this matter. Despite everything, Mr. Speaker, I continue to support this bill, and I fully agree with the main principle of the bill, which is that this is time for our children and grandchildren, in favor of our children and grandchildren, to end whale captivity. Thank you. Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Pontiac. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I rise today to speak on the issue of Bill S-203, which has the stated objective of ending captivity of whales and dolphins while allowing some exceptions for rescue and rehabilitation. And Mr. Speaker, I support this bill moving forward to be studied by a committee. And as MP for Pontiac, I call upon members of this chamber to move forward quickly so that this can be studied, because Canadians are expecting more action on this issue. We need to do a better job of protecting our whales and our dolphins. Banning whale and dolphin captivity would demonstrate a concrete step towards international leadership on this key animal welfare issue. It'll bring Canada into step with countries like France, India, Chile, Costa Rica, Switzerland, and various U.S. states where there are strict restrictions. And Mr. Speaker, Canadian values are evolving. They're changing. And as our scientific understanding evolves, so do Canadian values. And so does our appreciation for those sophisticated creatures with which we share this planet. Canadians understand that whales and dolphins are complicated, intelligent beings, and that the breeding and captivity of these species has no place in Canadian society. Now, the leading conservationist, or one of the leading conservationists of the past two generations, Dr. Jane Goodall, who I had the good fortune of meeting here in Parliament in 2016, she has said that the phasing out of captive cetacean programs is the natural progression of humankind's evolving view of our non-human animal kin. And this is an issue that has been raised by my constituents as embodying, yes, a scientific dimension, but also an important moral dimension. S-203 has attracted tremendous support from the public as well as politicians of all parties, and it is clear that it is an opportune moment for this bill to be sent to committee and studied further. En tant que député du Pontiac,
as the member for Pontiac, I am proud to invite my colleagues in this House to deal with this bill as quickly as possible and to study it in committee, because this is really an innovative measure to protect whales and dolphins. Banning whale captivity would be a significant step towards showing international leadership in terms of animal protection. More and more often, Canadians are showing that they are opposed to keeping whales in captivity. Currently, the only regions where whales are still held in captivity are in BC at the Vancouver Aquarium and in Marineland in Ontario.
Fierce debate continues over issues such as mortality rates and longevity, especially of whales and dolphins, while they're in captivity. And the most conclusive data, as I understand it, are for orcas. Their annual mortality rates are significantly higher in captivity than in the wild. And the mortality data related to live captures are relatively straightforward. Capture is undeniably stressful, and in the case of dolphins, results in a 6-fold increase in mortality risk during and immediately after capture. Live captures, particularly of dolphins, continue around the world in regions where very little is known about the status of populations. For smaller stocks, live capture operations are a significant conservation concern. So these are issues that we have to take seriously. Even for those stocks not currently under threat, the lack of scientific assessment or regard for welfare makes the proliferation of these operations an issue of global concern. So it is good and it is appropriate that Canadian legislators are examining putting an end to cetacean captivity. Now, in the case of Bill S-203, to achieve this objective, the bill would propose amendments to a series of statutes, namely the Criminal Code, the Fisheries Act, and the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulation of Interprovincial and International Trade Act, what tends to be called WAPRITA. La capture de cétacés dans la nature.
Capturing whales in nature falls under federal jurisdiction. The Minister of Fisheries and the Coast Guard has the power to authorize a license for capturing whales, but no such permit has actually been delivered since the 1990s.
Bill 203 proposes to amend the Fisheries Act in order to prohibit, and I'll quote, moving a live cetacean from its immediate vicinity with the intent to take it into captivity. This translates into making it illegal to capture or take a wild cetacean with the goal of keeping it captive. An exception is made when the animal is captured in order to help it. As mentioned in the first hour of debate, the amendments to the Fisheries Act that are proposed in Bill S-203 are substantively similar to those that were introduced by the government as part of Bill C-68. And in drafting C-68, great care was taken to include the intent of S-203, ending the capture of cetaceans from Canadian fishery waters for public display purposes. So like the bill before us today, S-203, C-68 includes provisions prohibiting the capture of cetaceans and would allow for changes to import regulations to stop the import of cetaceans. So I think that one of the important things for the committee members to achieve as they study S-203 is to examine what is the best legislative path forward given measures proposed in Bill C-68 and also those proposed in S-203. And I look forward to following that process carefully. I did want to say that there's one particular aspect that would merit an in-depth study. Because specifically around the amendments that this bill seeks to make in relation to WAPRITA, the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulation of International and Interprovincial Trade Act. WAPRITA forbids the import, export, and interprovincial transportation of species that it applies to, unless those specimens are accompanied by the appropriate documents, so licenses and permits. And in all cases, the Act applies to plant or animal, alive or dead, as well as the parts and any derived products. But what's most important, I think, to understand around WAPRITA, which is the domestic statute that enables us to fulfill our international obligations under the CITES Convention, is that it is a conservation-focused statute, and we need to make sure that the objectives of that statute are able to be consistent with S-203. So that's going to be an important discussion to have at committee. I think that the other thing that we need to take into account is that this debate speaks to Canadian values. J'avais l'opportunité
I had a wonderful opportunity to go not only to the east of Canada, but also the west, to the Pacific, and to the St. Lawrence, and to see some whales in nature. I know that many Canadians have had that opportunity and have been deeply affected by it.
Have loved that experience, and they can't even contemplate how cetaceans could be kept in captivity. My wife, Regina, she spent her summers, or spent a summer with Dr. Paul Spong on Vancouver Island at his research station on Hansen Island, studying the A5 pod. And she was forever changed by that experience. I think most Canadians will recognize just how important it is to all of us that we do right by these beasts, by these species that are so special. And so let's be conscious of the fact that these are some of the most highly sophisticated, most incredible beings in the universe, on Earth. And when they're in captivity, they demonstrate absolutely abnormal behaviors that we know are not, they're not right. And we need to make sure that Canadian legislation respects that these are incredibly sophisticated beings with incredibly complex social relations, and they deserve to be in the wild. So with that, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate this opportunity to urge this House to move this bill to study in committee.
Bravo.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands has the right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Je vais commencer avec
I'd like to start by thanking the members who have spoken this afternoon. In particular, I would like to thank the member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges, the member for Salaberry-sur-Roi, the member for Pontiac. And I'm just very happy to have the support of members from the NDP and from the Liberal Party for this truly important bill.
The bill comes to us from the Senate. It's one of those bills that does occasionally happen, that the bill originates in the Senate. So I want to, in reply, just quickly say, again, a huge thank you to retired Senator Wilfred Moore from Nova Scotia, who brought this bill initially forward in 2016. I also want to extend my deepest thanks to Senator Murray Sinclair, who took up this bill and ensured that it complied with concerns about the rights of Indigenous peoples as it moved forward. It's very important that this bill has had the review that it had in the Senate and that it comes to us finally. It was, as many people will know, held up for an unconscionable length of time, prevented from having a vote by a handful of senators. But it's here now, and we want to get it passed into law before this House rises in June and an election. We want to be able to say, and I hope Conservatives will want to be able to say as well, we're really pleased that we took this step to stop the torture, the cruel torture of cetaceans in Canada. Now, in response, I forgot to thank my friend from Caribou, Prince George, and I didn't intend to overlook his speech, but to thank him for his kind words towards me. I just want to assure him that within British Columbia, it is true that there are only 2 facilities in Canada that still have cetaceans in captivity. But I am so pleased to say that Vancouver Aquarium already took a voluntary step to ensure that they would not keep whales and dolphins in captivity any longer. The current population count in Vancouver Aquarium facility is 1 dolphin. Now, in Marineland in Niagara in Ontario, there are still 50 to 60 belugas, 5 dolphins, and 1 orca. And we're very concerned for the fate of those particular animals. But I also wanted to make sure it's on the record that it's not the goal of this legislation to harm any particular business, but to encourage them to transform, not to be dependent on keeping animals in cruel conditions in order to have a business. There are many facilities, as I mentioned, Vancouver Aquarium plans to remain, as it has always been, a place that families in the Vancouver area and tourists from all around the world want to visit. It, unlike Marineland, is not a purely commercial activity. Vancouver Aquarium, as the Honourable Member for Caribou Prince George mentioned, does a lot of stellar research. As a matter of fact, Dr. Peter Ross, who used to run the chemical contaminants program for our oceans within Department of Fisheries and Oceans, when that program was demolished by the previous government, he was able to continue his research within the Vancouver Aquarium. Vancouver Aquarium also houses the Oceanwise program. So they've made a transformational change, and they are not dependent on keeping whales and dolphins in captivity. Marineland could do the same. That would be wonderful, and they could transform themselves into an amusement park. I imagine that they should consult with the people who run Cirque du Soleil to imagine what kind of entertainment can be offered by human acrobats using a swimming pool as a base of a theater. In any case, I digress. The bill, S203, is ready for passage. It has been thoroughly studied, but we need to take it to committee here, as the member for Pontiac has said. I hope, indeed I pray, for continued support from all of the members in the Liberal benches, as well as in the New Democratic Party. I hope that the Conservatives will change their current view and that we will get this bill passed, because there's abundant scientific evidence. We have evidence from veterinarians. We have evidence from those who study marine mammals in the wild and marine mammals in captivity. And we know that for cetaceans, captivity is torture, and it's time that we put an end to it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is as follows. Ms. May, seconded by Monsieur Choquette, moved that Bill S-203, an act to amend the Criminal Code and other acts ending the captivity of whales and dolphins, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Is the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Yes. On division? On division. Mm-hmm. Carried on division.
Reading of this bill, deuxième lecture de ce projet de loi.
Accordingly, the bill stands referred to the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. It being 1:36, the House stands adjourned until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1. Everyone have a wonderful weekend.